I'll take the fat one. Those 5 words changed everything. In the scorching heat of Ironwood's market square, where human dignity was auctioned for pocket change, a mountain man's voice thundered across the crowd. Clara Boone stood there, 19 and forsaken, offered for a single dollar while the townspeople laughed. But Jonah Cutter saw something they didn't, a soul worth saving. Friends, settle in for a story that'll shake you to your core. Comment your city below. Let's see how far this tale travels tonight. The August sun bore down on Ironwood's market square with the weight of judgment itself. Heat waves rose from the packed dirt, creating mirages that made the whole scene feel like some fever dream. Though Clara Boone knew better. This was no hallucination. This was Tuesday in Ironwood, Colorado, 1882, and she was about to be sold like a sack of flour. Clara stood at the end of a line of workhouse girls, her broad shoulders squared against the humiliation. At 19, she'd already lived more hardship than most folks saw in a lifetime. The coal dust from 3 years in the Black Ridge mine still clung to the creases of her palms, no matter how hard she scrubbed. Her dress, if you could call the patched gray thing a dress, hung loose on her frame, though she was far from small. She was what the foreman at the workhouse called sturdy stock, built for labor, not for the delicate work most households wanted in a girl. The auctioneer, a weasel-faced man named Cornelius Pratt, dabbed at his forehead with a yellowed handkerchief. He'd been at this since dawn, selling off the workhouse contracts to anyone willing to pay the county's fees. Most of the girls had gone quick, the pretty ones to the saloons, the young ones to the ranches where they'd work kitchens and mind children. But Clara was the remainder, the leftover, the one nobody wanted. "Now, folks," Pratt called out, his voice carrying that false cheer of a man trying to sell spoiled meat. "We got ourselves one more opportunity here. Strong girl, good for heavy work. Muscles like a plow hand, this one. Starting bid at $5 for her work contract." The crowd, maybe 30 people strong, shifted uncomfortably. Some laughed. Clara recognized most of them. Mrs. Henderson from the general store, whispering behind her fan to Mrs. Clearwater. Tom Bradley, the banker's son, nudging his friend and pointing. Sheriff Hawley stood near the platform, his badge catching the sun, watching everything with those cold gray eyes of his. $5. Pratt tried again, his smile faltering. "Come now, surely someone needs—" "She's too big," someone called out. "Eat us out of house and home." "Probably can't even fit through a normal door," another voice added, triggering a wave of cruel laughter. Clara's jaw tightened, but she kept her eyes forward, focused on a point somewhere beyond the crowd. She'd learned long ago that dignity was sometimes all you had left, and she'd be damned if she'd let them take that too. Her fingers found the small carved wooden bird in her pocket, the last thing her mother had given her before the fever took her. She rubbed her thumb across its worn surface, drawing strength from the memory. $3 then, Pratt said, desperation creeping into his voice. The county needed these contracts sold. Every girl still standing on this platform at day's end would be sent back to the workhouse, and the workhouse was already overflowing. $3 for a strong back and willing hands. The crowd had already started to disperse. Some headed for the shade of the mercantile's awning. Others wandered toward the saloon, seeking refuge from both the heat and the uncomfortable spectacle of human commerce. $2, Pratt's voice cracked. Surely, nobody wants her, Pratt, Sheriff Hawley said, not unkindly, but with the matter-of-fact tone of stating the obvious. Maybe send this one back where she came from. Clara's stomach twisted. Back to the workhouse meant back to the endless gray walls, the thin gruel, the 17-hour days in the laundry where the lye ate through your skin and the steam made you feel like you were drowning standing up. She'd rather die than go back. She'd rather— $1, Pratt said quietly, defeated. $1, folks. That's less than you'd pay for a day's labor. $1 for a year's contract. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Clara had ever heard. It pressed against her ears, filled her throat, made her want to scream. $1. That's what she was worth. Less than a bottle of whiskey. Less than a new shirt. Less than— I'll take the fat one. The voice came from the back of the square, deep and rumbling like distant thunder. Every head turned. Clara's eyes followed, and what she saw made her heart skip. The man stood at least 6.5 feet tall, maybe more. His shoulders were broad enough that he had to turn slightly to pass between the market stalls. A thick black beard covered most of his face, but his eyes, Lord, those eyes were the color of pine needles after rain. He wore buckskins that had seen better decades, and a rifle rested easy across his back. This was no town man. This was something else entirely. Jonah Cutter. Clara had heard the name whispered in the workhouse, a mountain man who came down maybe twice a year for supplies. Some said he'd killed a grizzly with nothing but a knife. Others said he'd scalped Indians during the range wars. The stories varied, but they all agreed on one thing: Jonah Cutter was dangerous. He moved through the crowd like Moses parting the Red Sea. People stepped back without being asked, some from fear, others from simple self-preservation. His boots made heavy sounds on the packed earth, each step deliberate and unhurried. "Mr. Cutter," Pratt stammered, suddenly looking very small on his platform. I didn't know you were in town." "I'm in town now," Jonah said simply. His voice had a quality to it that made you want to lean in and back away at the same time. The girl. $1, you said? "Yes, but, Pratt glanced at Clara, then back at Jonah, clearly wrestling with some internal debate. "Mr. Cutter, perhaps one of the other establishments might have a girl more suitable for your needs. Mrs. Millicent's boarding house has—" "Did I ask about Mrs. Millicent's boarding house?" Jonah's tone didn't change, but something in it made Pratt take a step backward. "No, sir." "Then we got business or not?" Pratt's hands shook as he shuffled through his papers. "Of course, Mr. Cutter. $1 for the work contract. She's bound for 1 year of service, room and board at your expense. No wages required beyond—" Jonah reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver dollar. The coin caught the sun as he flipped it toward the platform. Pratt fumbled the catch, had to bend to retrieve it from where it rolled. "Papers," Jonah said. While Pratt scrambled to complete the documentation, Clara found herself studying this mountain man who'd just bought her for the price of a cheap meal. He hadn't looked at her once since making his declaration. His attention seemed focused on something beyond the square, maybe on the mountains that rose like blue teeth on the horizon. She wondered what he wanted with her: cooking, cleaning, or something worse. She'd heard stories about what men did to workhouse girls when they got them alone, away from town, away from help. "There's one thing, Mr. Cutter," Pratt said carefully, holding out the papers. "The girl needs to sign too. County requirement." For the first time, Jonah looked directly at Clara. Their eyes met across 20 feet of dusty ground, and Clara felt something shift in her chest. There was no cruelty in that gaze, no hunger, no meanness, just a steady assessment, like he was reading something written on her face. "Can you write your name, girl?" he asked. Clara lifted her chin. "I can read and write both. My mother was a school teacher before—" She stopped, biting off the words. No one needed to know her history. No one cared. "Good," Jonah said. "Come sign your paper, then." Clara descended from the platform on unsteady legs. The crowd parted for her too, though for different reasons. Where they'd moved from Jonah out of fear, they moved from her out of disgust. She heard the whispers as she passed. "Poor man doesn't know what he's getting. Probably can't see too good, all that time in the mountains. Wait till he tries to feed that appetite." Clara kept walking. When she reached the small table where Pratt had laid out the papers, Jonah handed her the pen. Their fingers brushed for just a moment, and Clara was surprised to find his hand warm and steady. "Name's Clara Boone," she said quietly, not sure why she felt the need to tell him. "I know who you are," he replied, which sent another ripple of surprise through her. How could he know? She'd been nobody before this moment. Nobody worth knowing, anyway. She signed her name in neat script, her mother would have been proud, and set down the pen. Pratt snatched up the papers like they might catch fire, clearly eager to conclude this uncomfortable business. "That's all settled then," Pratt said quickly. "Mr. Cutter, she's yours for the year. Any problems? You can return her to the workhouse, though there's no refund of the $1. You understand." Jonah didn't acknowledge him. Instead, he turned to Clara. "You got belongings?" "Just what I'm wearing," Clara said, then remembered. "And this?" She pulled the small wooden bird from her pocket, half expecting him to tell her to leave it. He glanced at it, nodded. We're going then. He turned and started walking toward the edge of the square, where a large roan horse stood tethered to a post. Clara hurried to follow, her mind racing. Should she say goodbye to anyone? But who would care? The other workhouse girls were gone, sold to their own fates. She had no friends in this town, no connections beyond suffering. The horse was enormous, fitting for its owner. Jonah swung up into the saddle with practiced ease, then looked down at her. You ride? I can walk, Clara said quickly. The thought of being that close to him, pressed against his back for however long the journey took, made her stomach flip. It's 15 miles to my place. In this heat, you'll be dead in 5. He extended his hand. Come on! Clara stared at that hand, calloused, scarred, huge, and made a decision. Whatever waited for her at the end of this ride, it had to be better than what she was leaving behind. She grasped his hand, shocked by the easy strength with which he lifted her. One moment her feet were on the ground. The next, she was settling onto the horse behind him, trying to figure out where to put her hands. Hold on or fall off, Jonah said. Your choice. Clara carefully placed her hands on his sides, barely touching. The horse started forward, and she immediately had to grip tighter or risk sliding off. She could feel the solid warmth of him through the buckskin, smell something like pine sap and wood smoke. As they rode out of Ironwood, Clara caught a last glimpse of the market square. Pratt was already packing up his platform. The crowd had fully dispersed onto their regular Tuesday business. It was like she'd never existed at all, like the humiliation of being worth only $1 had been erased the moment Jonah Cutter claimed her. The town fell away behind them, replaced by scrub brush and red rock. The mountains grew larger with each mile, their peaks still carrying snow despite the August heat. Jonah didn't speak, and Clara didn't know what to say, so they rode in silence, broken only by the steady rhythm of hooves on dirt. After an hour, they stopped at a stream to water the horse. Jonah dismounted first, then helped Clara down. Her legs were shaky from the ride, muscles already sore from the unfamiliar position. Drink, he said, gesturing to the stream. It's clean here. Clara knelt by the water's edge, cupping the cold liquid in her hands. It tasted like heaven after the stale, metallic water of the workhouse. She drank deeply, then splashed some on her face, washing away the dust and shame of the morning. When she stood, Jonah was watching her with that same steady gaze. Why? She asked before she could stop herself. Why what? Why did you buy me? You don't know me. You could have had any of those other girls for $5, 10. Prettier ones, smaller ones, ones that would fit better. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, you ever see a wild Mustang penned up? Clara shook her head. They got a look in their eyes, proud and broken at the same time, like they're just waiting for a chance to run or a reason to die. He adjusted his rifle strap. You had that look. And you want to break me complete? Is that it? No. He moved back toward the horse. I want to see you run. Clara stood there, stunned, as he remounted. What kind of answer was that? What kind of man was this? We're wasting daylight, he said, extending his hand again. This time, Clara took it without hesitation. The trail grew steeper as they climbed into the foothills. The air cooled, pine trees replacing the scrub brush. Clara had never been this far from town, never seen country this wild. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. A hawk circled overhead, its cry echoing off the canyon walls. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear water rushing. Your mother, Jonah said suddenly, the first words he'd spoken in miles. You said she was a school teacher. Before she married my father, yes. Back in Ohio. She taught me letters and numbers, some poetry too. Clara found herself talking more than she'd intended. She used to say education was the only thing they couldn't take from you. Turns out she was wrong about that too. How'd you end up in the workhouse? How does anyone? Clara's grip on his sides tightened unconsciously. Father died in a mine collapse when I was 14. Mother took in washing, but it wasn't enough. She got sick, couldn't work. I tried to keep us going, but she shrugged, though he couldn't see it. Debt collectors don't care about your sad story. When Mother died, they took everything. The house, the furniture, even her books. Said I owed more than it was all worth, so the workhouse would settle the debt through my labor. 3 years then. 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days. The precision of it surprised her. She hadn't realized she'd been counting. They rode on. The trail narrowed, winding between massive pines that blocked out most of the sun. The temperature dropped enough that Clara was grateful for the warmth of Jonah's back. She'd never been this close to a man before, not by choice anyway. It should have frightened her, but something about the steady rhythm of his breathing, the careful way he guided the horse around obstacles, made her feel safer than she had in years. "What will you have me do?" she asked as they created a rise. "At your place, I mean. What's my work?" "Cook, clean, whatever needs doing." "I can do that. I'm a good worker. I won't give you trouble." He made a sound that might have been a laugh, though it was hard to tell. "Didn't figure you would." The sun was starting to sink toward the western peaks when they finally turned off the main trail onto a path Clara wouldn't have seen if Jonah hadn't guided them there. It wound through trees so thick they formed a tunnel, branches interweaving overhead. The horse picked its way carefully over exposed roots and rocks. Then, suddenly, they emerged into a clearing, and Clara's breath caught. The cabin sat nestled against a cliff face, built from logs so perfectly fitted she couldn't see any gaps between them. A stone chimney rose from one end, and actual glass windows, a luxury she hadn't expected, reflected the golden afternoon light. A covered porch ran the length of the front, with a rocking chair positioned to catch the mountain view. To one side she could see a well-maintained garden, and beyond that a small barn. But it was the setting that truly stunned her. The clearing opened onto a vista of mountains layering back into the distance, each ridge a different shade of blue and purple. A stream ran along the edge of the property, its sound a constant soothing murmur. Wildflowers dotted the meadow grass. Indian paintbrush, columbine. Flowers she didn't have names for. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Jonah dismounted, then helped her down. "It's home." He led the horse to the barn while Clara stood there, trying to reconcile this paradise with what she'd expected. She'd imagined a dirty shack, maybe a lean-to against a rock face, something that matched the rough appearance of its owner. But this? This was carefully crafted, lovingly maintained. This was the home of someone who cared about things beyond mere survival. When Jonah returned from the barn, he found her still standing in the same spot, staring. "Something wrong?" I didn't expect—" "What? That a mountain man might know how to build proper shelter?" There was no offense in his tone, maybe even a hint of amusement. "I didn't expect it to be beautiful," she said honestly. He studied her for a moment, then headed toward the cabin. "Come on, I'll show you inside." The interior was just as surprising as the exterior. Clean, organized, with furniture that, while simple, was well made and comfortable looking. A large fireplace dominated one wall, with cooking implements hanging beside it. Shelves held supplies in neat rows, preserved foods, medicines, ammunition, and books. Clara's heart leapt at the sight of them. At least a dozen volumes, their spines worn from use. "You read?" she asked, unable to hide her excitement. "Winter nights are long up here." He moved toward a door on the far wall. "This'll be your room." Clara followed him, expecting a closet or storage space converted to sleeping quarters. Instead, she found a proper bedroom with a real bed. Not a cot, a bed with a carved headboard and what looked like a down mattress. A dresser stood against one wall, a washstand against another. A small window looked out toward the mountains. This is too nice," she said. "I can sleep in the main room, or this is your room," he said firmly. "Mine's on the other side." "You'll have privacy." Privacy. When had she last had privacy? The workhouse was dormitory-style sleeping, 40 women to a room. Even the outhouse was communal. "Why are you doing this?" she asked again, but differently this time. Not suspicious, just genuinely confused. "You don't know me." "I could rob you blind, run off in the night." "Could you?" He leaned against the doorframe, considering her. "Where would you go? Back to town? Back to the workhouse?" He shook his head. "Besides, what would you rob? The books? The preserves? Nothing here worth stealing except maybe the horse, and Brutus wouldn't go with you anyway. He's particular about his company. Then why—" You asked me that already. You didn't really answer. He was quiet for a moment, looking past her out the window. You know what the worst thing about town is? Clara waited. The waste, he said. People throwing away things that are still good, still useful, still got life in them. Just because they don't look exactly right, don't fit exactly where folks think they should. His eyes met hers. I don't like waste. Before Clara could respond, he straightened. You hungry? Her stomach answered for her, growling loudly. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten, yesterday morning maybe, a handful of gruel that was more water than meal. I'll take that as a yes. Wash up if you want. Pumps out back for water. I'll get something cooking. He left her standing in what was apparently her room. Her room. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, half expecting to wake up back in the workhouse. The mattress was soft beneath her, clean sheets, an actual pillow. She pressed her face into it and, for the first time in 3 years, allowed herself to cry. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of being treated like a human being. When she emerged, face washed and hair repinned as best she could manage, Jonah had a pot hanging over the fire. The smell made her mouth water, meat and vegetables and herbs she couldn't identify. He handed her a bowl without ceremony, and she had to force herself not to wolf it down like an animal. Good? He asked after she'd eaten half the bowl. It's the best thing I've ever tasted, she said honestly. It's just stew. It's stew with actual meat in it, and vegetables that aren't rotten, and salt. She took another bite, savoring it. In the workhouse, we got gruel twice a day. Sometimes they'd throw in cabbage cores or potato peelings if we were lucky. Jonah's expression darkened. That's no way to keep people. It's not about keeping people. It's about keeping them desperate enough to accept anything. She set down her empty bowl, already missing the food. Like being sold for $1. He refilled her bowl without asking. Eat what you want. There's plenty. As she ate her second helping, slower this time, Jonah moved around the cabin with practiced efficiency. He added wood to the fire, checked the locks on the windows, set a rifle by the door. His movements were economical, purposeful. A man used to living alone, taking care of himself. How long have you been up here? Clara asked. Built the cabin 7 years ago. Been here since. Alone? Mostly. Don't you get lonely? He shrugged. Lonely's better than some alternatives. Clara wanted to ask what alternatives, but something in his tone suggested that was a closed subject. Instead, she said, The books. Where did you get them? Here and there. Trade for them sometimes. Found a few in abandoned homesteads. He moved to the shelf, ran a finger along the spines. You're welcome to read them if you're careful. Really? What else you going to do in the evenings? Stare at the walls? Clara stood, drawn to the books like a moth to flame. She recognized some titles. The Last of the Mohicans, Robinson Crusoe, a collection of Shakespeare's plays. Others were new to her. Her fingers trembled as she touched them. My mother had books, she said softly. Not many, but she treasured them. Used to read to me every night before bed. Even when we were so poor we were burning furniture for warmth, she wouldn't let Father touch the books. What happened to them? Sold to pay debts, like everything else. She pulled out a volume of poetry, opened it carefully. The debt collector said books were a luxury we couldn't afford. Mother would have disagreed, but she was already gone by then. Take it to your room if you want. Light should be good for another hour. Clara clutched the book to her chest. Thank you. He waved off her gratitude. There's a few rules about living here. She tensed, waiting. Here it came. The restrictions, the demands, the real price of that $1. Don't go into the woods alone after dark. Cats hunt at night, and they're not particular about their prey. The stream's good for drinking anywhere upstream of the cabin, but boil it if you take from below. Garden's yours to tend if you want it. I'm no good with growing things. And if someone comes calling when I'm not here, you don't open the door. You hide in your room and wait for them to leave. Who would come calling all the way up here? His expression went hard. No one good. Clara nodded, filing that warning away. Anything else? Yeah. He moved toward his own room. You're not a servant here. You're not property. You work? I work. We both eat. We both rest. You want something? You ask. You need something? You tell me. And if you decide you can't stand it here—" He paused at his doorway. "Well, we'll figure that out if it happens." He disappeared into his room, leaving Clara standing there with a book of poetry in her hands and a confusion of feelings in her chest. She'd been bought for $1 by a mountain man with a violent reputation, and somehow she felt safer than she had in years. That night, lying in a real bed with clean sheets and a full stomach, Clara read poetry by candlelight until her eyes grew heavy. Through the thin walls, she could hear Jonah moving around his own room, the occasional creak of floorboards. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. She thought about his words. "I want to see you run." What did that mean? What was he expecting from her? She'd been prepared for cruelty, for demands, for the kind of treatment workhouse girls learned to expect from men who bought them. Instead, she'd gotten kindness, privacy, books. It didn't make sense. But as she drifted towards sleep, the wooden bird her mother had carved clutched in one hand, Clara decided that maybe it didn't need to make sense. Not yet. For now, it was enough to be treated like a person instead of livestock. It was enough to be clean and fed and safe. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. Tonight, for the first time in 3 years, Clara Boone fell asleep without fear. The sound of chopping wood woke her at dawn. For a moment, she lay there confused, expecting the harsh bell of the workhouse, the groans of 40 women rising from inadequate sleep. Instead, she heard birds singing and the steady thwack of an axe hitting wood. She dressed quickly in her same worn dress, the only one she owned, and ventured out. Jonah was behind the cabin, splitting logs with an economy of motion that spoke of years of practice. He'd removed his shirt, and Clara could see the map of scars across his back. Some old and white, others newer. Battle scars, maybe. Or something worse. "Morning," he said, without turning around. "How did you know I was there?" "You walk heavy for someone trying to be quiet." He split another log. "There's coffee on the stove. Biscuits, too, if you're hungry." Clara's stomach rumbled at the mention of food. In the workhouse, breakfast was the same gruel as dinner, if you got breakfast at all. "Can I help with something?" "Eat first. Then we'll talk about work." She found the coffee, real coffee, not the burnt chicory the workhouse served, and poured herself a cup. The biscuits were still warm, and there was actual butter to spread on them. Honey, too. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, while watching Jonah work through the window. He moved like he did everything else, purposeful, efficient, without waste. But there was something almost meditative about it, too, a rhythm that seemed to bring him peace. She wondered what had driven him to this isolation, what had made the mountains preferable to human company. When he came in, pulling his shirt back on, Clara had cleaned up the dishes and was examining the state of the cabin more closely in daylight. "It needs work," she said. "The floors could use scrubbing, the windows need cleaning, and that corner has cobwebs that might be older than me. That's why you're here. Just cleaning and cooking, mending if you can, garden if you're inclined." He poured himself coffee. "I hunt, trap, fish, take care of the heavy work. You take care of the rest. Fair?" "More than fair." She hesitated, then asked, "What about washing?" "I didn't see a wash tub." "Stream for clothes when weather permits. There's a tub in the barn for winter. You'll want to make yourself some more clothes before the snow comes." "From what?" "I don't have—" He opened a trunk near the door, pulled out folded fabric. "Traded for these last year. Never did anything with them." Clara examined the cloth, good quality wool and cotton, enough for several dresses and undergarments. There were needles and thread, too. "This is too much." "It's practical. You can't spend a Colorado winter in that." He gestured at her threadbare dress. "You'd freeze to death before December." The matter-of-fact way he said it, not cruel, just honest, made Clara laugh. "Well, we can't have that." Who would clean your cobwebs? Was that a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth? It was gone too quickly to be sure. The days fell into a rhythm faster than Clara expected. She woke with the sun, made breakfast while Jonah tended the animals. He had chickens she hadn't noticed that first day, and a goat for milk. They ate together, usually in comfortable silence, then went about their separate tasks. She attacked the cabin with a vengeance. years of forced labor having taught her efficiency, if nothing else. But this was different from the workhouse. There, cleaning was endless, pointless, never good enough. Here, she could see the results of her work, take pride in them. The windows sparkled, the floors gleamed, the cobwebs vanished, replaced by bunches of wildflowers she gathered from the meadow. Jonah never commented on the changes, but she caught him running his hand over the freshly polished table, noticed how he paused to look at the flowers she'd arranged on the mantel. In the afternoons, while bread rose or stew simmered, she worked on her new clothes. Her fingers remembered her mother's teachings, the careful stitches that would hold through wear and washing. She made practical things, work dresses, aprons, undergarments that weren't held together by prayers and patches. Evenings were for reading. After dinner, Jonah would settle with his rifle, cleaning and maintaining it, while Clara lost herself in books. Sometimes she read aloud, not really meaning to, just falling into the habit from reading to her mother during her illness. Jonah never told her to stop. One evening, about 2 weeks into her stay, she was reading from Shakespeare, Sonnet 116, when Jonah suddenly spoke. "Love is not love which alters when it alteration finds," he quoted. "My mother liked that one." Clara looked up, surprised. "You know it?" She was a schoolteacher too. Back in Pennsylvania, before she met my father. He continued cleaning his rifle, but his movements had slowed. She tried to keep teaching us even after we moved west. Said education was the only thing they couldn't take from you, Clara finished. Their eyes met across the room. Something passed between them, a recognition of shared loss, shared understanding. "What happened to her?" Clara asked softly. "Cholera. Took her and my 2 sisters in the same week." He set down the rifle. "I was 15. Father lasted another year before he put a gun in his mouth." "I'm sorry." "Long time ago." But the way he said it suggested time didn't matter much when it came to that kind of pain. They sat in silence for a while, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people who understood that sometimes words were inadequate. "That's why you hate waste," Clara said eventually. He looked at her, waiting. "You've seen too much of it. Good things, good people, thrown away or lost for no good reason." "Maybe," he stood, stretching. "Or maybe I just don't like paying more than $1 for household help." It was a joke. She was learning to recognize his very dry humor, but there was truth underneath it too. As the weeks passed, Clara found herself settling into this strange new life. She learned Jonah's preferences: coffee black, meat cooked but not overdone, silence in the morning, but conversation sometimes acceptable by evening. She learned the mountain rhythms too, how the weather could change in minutes, how to read the signs of coming storms, which berries were safe to gather, and which would kill you dead. Jonah, for his part, seemed to accept her presence as easily as he accepted the seasons changing. He never demanded, never grabbed, never made her feel unsafe. If anything, he seemed to go out of his way to give her space, to maintain boundaries. But sometimes she caught him watching her, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but with a kind of puzzlement, like he was trying to figure something out. One morning in late September, Clara woke to find frost on the windows. The delicate patterns caught the early sunlight, turning the glass into a canvas of ice crystals. She traced them with her finger, marveling at the intricate designs nature could create without any human hand to guide it. "First frost," Jonah said from behind her. She hadn't heard him come in. "Winter comes early up here, sometimes stays late too." "It's beautiful," Clara said, still mesmerized by the patterns. "Beautiful doesn't keep you warm when it's 20 below and the snow's piled higher than the windows." He set an armload of wood by the fireplace. "You'll need warmer clothes." "What you've made won't be enough." "I've used all the fabric." "Then we'll get more." "Supply run to town tomorrow." Clara's stomach dropped. Town meant Ironwood. Ironwood meant facing the people who'd laughed at her, who'd witnessed her humiliation. "I could stay here. Watch the place while you're gone." Jonah studied her for a long moment. "That what you want? Hide up here forever?" "I'm not hiding. I don't need anything from town. Winter doesn't care what you need or don't need. It just comes." He moved toward the door, then paused. "You're not the same girl who stood on that platform." Might be worth letting them see that. After he left, Clara stood at the window for a long time, thinking about his words. Was she different? She felt different. 3 weeks of proper food had filled out her frame some. The mountain sun had brought color to her cheeks. The constant fear that had lived in her belly for 3 years had quieted to an occasional whisper. But did any of that matter to people who'd already decided what she was worth? That evening, as she served dinner, venison stew with vegetables from the garden she'd coaxed back to life, Jonah surprised her. "You never asked," he said suddenly. "Asked what?" "About the stories. What people say about me." Clara set down her spoon carefully. "Figure if you wanted me to know, you'd tell me. You're not curious." "I'm curious about a lot of things. Doesn't mean I need answers to all of them." He chewed thoughtfully, then said, "I killed a man." 3 men, actually. That's what started the stories. Clara waited, sensing there was more. They were attacking a native family. Man, woman, 2 children, travelers, heading north to relatives. The 3 men thought they'd have some fun. His voice was flat, emotionless, but his knuckles were white around his spoon. "I stopped them." "Good." He looked up sharply. "Good. Men who attack families for fun deserve stopping." She met his gaze steadily. "I don't care if they were white men and the family wasn't." Wrong is wrong. Something shifted in his expression. "The town didn't see it that way. Sheriff wanted to arrest me. Would have, except the native man I helped was married to the territorial governor's cousin. Complicated things enough that they couldn't hang me, but they made it clear I wasn't welcome in town except for necessary business." "Is that why you built up here? To get away from them?" "Partly. Also because I learned something that day." "What?" "That given the choice between doing what's right and doing what's easy, most people pick easy every time, and they'll hate anyone who reminds them there was a choice." Clara thought about the workhouse, about the good Christian women who walked past it every Sunday on their way to church, pretending not to hear the sounds from inside. "Yes," she said quietly. "They will." They finished dinner in silence, but it was the kind of silence that said more than words could. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Clara dressed in her warmest clothes, still not warm enough, Jonah was right about that, and steeled herself for the trip to town. She climbed up behind him on Brutus, the position familiar now, though she was aware of him in a way she hadn't been that first day. The solid warmth of him, the way he shifted slightly to make sure she was comfortable, the careful way he held the reins. The ride down the mountain was beautiful in the morning light. Aspens had turned gold, their leaves shimmering like coins in the breeze. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals. Despite her dread about town, Clara found herself enjoying the journey. "You're quiet," Jonah observed after they'd been riding for an hour. "Thinking? About how different everything looks from up here, like the whole world is spread out just for us to see." "It is, in a way. Not many folks come up this high. Too much work, too much risk. But you chose it." "I chose it." He guided Brutus around a fallen log. "What would you choose if you could choose anything?" The question caught her off guard. "I don't know. I haven't thought about choosing in so long, I'm not sure I remember how." "You chose to come with me." "That wasn't really a choice. It was just the least bad option." "There's always a choice. You could have refused, could have run, could have fought. And ended up dead or back in the workhouse. But those were still choices. Bad ones, maybe, but yours to make." He shifted slightly in the saddle. "Most people don't realize how many choices they have until they're all gone." Clara thought about that as they descended toward town. Choice. Such a simple word for such a complicated thing. She'd felt choiceless for so long, she'd forgotten what it meant to want something beyond survival. The outskirts of Ironwood came into view, and Clara's hands tightened involuntarily on Jonah's sides. He must have felt it because he said, "We don't have to go to the main street." "There's a back way to Murphy's store." "No," Clara heard herself say. "You were right. I'm not the same girl. Might as well let them see it." She felt rather than heard his approval, a slight relaxation in his shoulders, a subtle nod. Main Street was busy for a Wednesday. Wagons lined up outside the Mercantile, women in their shopping bonnets moving between stores. Men gathered outside the saloon even though it was barely noon. As Jonah guided Brutus down the street, Clara saw heads turn, conversations stop. She recognized Mrs. Henderson first, the woman who'd whispered behind her fan at the auction. Their eyes met, and Clara didn't look away. Mrs. Henderson did, her face flushing as she suddenly found something fascinating in the Mercantile window. Tom Bradley was next, the banker's son who'd pointed and laughed. He started to sneer, then seemed to register who she was with. Jonah Cutter, the mountain man who'd killed 3 men. Tom's expression shifted from mockery to unease, and he quickly crossed to the other side of the street. "Enjoying yourself?" Jonah asked quietly. "I'm not sure," Clara admitted. "It feels strange, like I'm wearing armor made of your reputation." "That bother you?" She thought about it. "No. Should it? Most people don't like being associated with killers. Most people sold me for $1. That surprised a sound from him that might have been a laugh. "Fair point." They stopped outside Murphy's General Store, and Jonah dismounted first, then helped Clara down. She was aware of eyes on them, the weight of the town's curiosity and judgment. "Miss Boone," a voice called. Clara turned to find Sheriff Hawley approaching, his hand resting casual-like on his gun. "Didn't expect to see you back in town." "Sheriff," she acknowledged, proud when her voice came out steady. His eyes shifted to Jonah. "Cutter, everything satisfactory up at your place?" "Why wouldn't it be?" Jonah's tone was mild, but Clara heard the edge underneath. "Just checking. Want to make sure Miss Boone here is well treated." "Since when do you care about the treatment of workhouse girls?" Clara asked before she could stop herself. "You stood right there while I was auctioned off like cattle. Didn't seem too concerned about my treatment then." The sheriff's face darkened. "Now, miss, that was legal and proper." "Legal doesn't make it right," Clara interrupted. "Mr. Cutter treats me with more dignity than this whole town combined ever did. So maybe you should be asking if I'm treating him satisfactory, since he's the one who paid good money for damaged goods." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Sheriff Hawley's mouth opened and closed, but nothing came out. Behind him, Clara could see people gathering, pretending not to listen while hanging on every word. "We need supplies," Jonah said, breaking the tension. "Unless there's a law against that now, too." The sheriff stepped aside, but his eyes stayed on Clara. "You need help, miss. Any kind of help. You just say the word. The only help I needed was 3 years ago when my mother died, and your good Christian town decided I was worth less than the debt on a 2-room house. Where was your concern then, Sheriff?" She walked past him into the store, her heart hammering but her head high. Behind her, she heard Jonah say something too low to catch, then his footsteps following her inside. Murphy's was dim after the bright street, and it took a moment for Clara's eyes to adjust. When they did, she found Mr. Murphy himself staring at her like she'd grown a second head. Miss Boone?" "Mr. Murphy." She moved toward the fabric bolts, running her fingers over the materials with the confidence of someone who had every right to be there. "I need wool. Something thick enough for winter, and flannel for undergarments." Of course." He scrambled to pull down bolts. "You look different." "Fed and clean will do that to a person," Clara said evenly. "Though I wouldn't expect you to know that, considering you wouldn't even let workhouse girls into your store unless they had cash in hand." Mr. Murphy's face went red. That was policy. "I don't make the rules." "No," Clara agreed. "You just enforce them. How much for 5 yards of the wool and 3 of the flannel?" While Murphy calculated, Jonah moved through the store, gathering supplies with his usual efficiency. Coffee, flour, salt, ammunition, practical things for the winter ahead. Clara noticed him pause at a display of books, his fingers hovering over a leather-bound volume. "It's Shakespeare," she said, coming up beside him. "The complete works." "You have some Shakespeare already." "Just the plays." "This has the sonnets, too, all of them." She touched the binding reverently. "My mother had one like this. She used to say Shakespeare understood the human heart better than anyone who ever lived." Jonah picked up the book, added it to his pile. That's too expensive, Clara protested. Winter's long. We'll need the reading material. Before she could argue further, the store's bell chimed and 3 women entered. Clara recognized them immediately. Mrs. Clearwater, Mrs. Wilkins, and Mrs. Abernathy. The town's social arbiters, the ones who decided who was respectable and who wasn't. They stopped short when they saw Clara. Clara Boone, Mrs. Clearwater said, her tone making the name sound like an accusation. Mrs. Clearwater. Clara nodded politely, though her jaw was tight. We heard you were, purchased. By Mr. Cutter here. I was. For $1, if memory serves. Quite the bargain, wouldn't you say? Mrs. Wilkins gasped. How can you be so cavalier about such a thing? Would you prefer I be ashamed? Broken? Grateful for whatever scraps of dignity the good people of Ironwood might throw my way? Clara stepped closer to them. I stood on that platform for an hour while you all laughed. While you made jokes about my size, my worth, my prospects, not one of you, not one, spoke up to say it was wrong. It was perfectly legal, Mrs. Abernathy started. So was slavery, once upon a time. Didn't make it right. Clara felt Jonah's presence behind her, solid and reassuring. But you know what? I should thank you, all of you. Your cruelty led me to the first real home I've had in 3 years. Your mockery put me in the hands of the only decent person in this whole town. Decent? Mrs. Clearwater's voice rose. The man's a killer. He killed 3 men who were attacking an innocent family. What's your excuse for letting workhouse girls starve while you throw away food that's a day old? What's your excuse for walking past that workhouse every Sunday, pretending you don't know what goes on inside? The women exchanged uncomfortable glances. At least Mr. Cutter's honest about what he is, Clara continued. He doesn't hide behind church bells and social calls while people suffer right under his nose. How dare you? Mrs. Wilkins began. How dare I what? Speak truth? Live? Be worth more than the $1 he paid for me? Clara laughed, and it wasn't a pleasant sound. I know what you all thought. Poor stupid mountain man buying the fat girl nobody wanted. You probably made jokes about it for days. Well, look at me now. She spread her arms, letting them see what 3 weeks of proper food and care had done. She was still large, would always be large, but now it was the largeness of health and strength, not desperation and starvation. I'm clean. I'm fed. I'm clothed. I sleep in a real bed and read books by a warm fire. I wake up without fear and go to bed without hunger. Can you imagine? Can any of you imagine what that means to someone who's had neither for 3 years? The shop had gone completely silent. Even Mr. Murphy had stopped pretending to work, watching the confrontation with wide eyes. We should go, Mrs. Clearwater said stiffly. Come, ladies. The air in here has become quite unpleasant. As they swept toward the door, Clara called after them. Mrs. Clearwater? The woman turned, her expression haughty. That pound cake recipe you're so proud of? The one you won't share? It needs more vanilla and less sugar. Also, your husband waters down the milk he sells. Thought you should know. Mrs. Clearwater's face went white, then red. She left without another word, the bell clanging violently behind her. In the silence that followed, Mr. Murphy cleared his throat. That'll be $8 for everything. Jonah paid without comment, gathering up their purchases. As they prepared to leave, Murphy said quietly, Miss Boone? For what it's worth, you do look well. Clara studied him for a moment. It's worth nothing, Mr. Murphy, but thank you for saying it anyway. Outside, they loaded the supplies onto Brutus in silence. Clara could feel the town's eyes on them, conversations buzzing behind windows and doorways. Her confrontation with the town ladies would be the talk of Ironwood for weeks. That was quite a performance, Jonah said as he helped her mount. It wasn't a performance. I meant every word. I know. He swung up in front of her. That's what made it magnificent. As they rode out of town, Clara felt something shift inside her chest. Not healing, that would take much longer, but maybe the beginning of it, the start of something that might, eventually, become wholeness. They were 5 miles from town when Jonah spoke again. Your mother's pound cake recipe? She never made pound cake, but Mrs. Clearwater doesn't know that. This time, she was certain the sound he made was laughter. The next few days passed quietly, Clara working on her new winter clothes while the September sun grew weaker and the nights grew longer. She found herself thinking about the confrontation in town, wondering if she'd gone too far, said too much. "You're brooding," Jonah observed one evening as she stabbed her needle through fabric with unnecessary force. "I'm sewing." "You're brooding while sewing." "What's eating at you?" Clara set down her work. "Do you think I was too harsh? In town? Do you?" "I don't know. Maybe. They're products of their raising, same as anyone. So were the men I killed. Doesn't excuse what they tried to do. Words aren't the same as violence. Aren't they?" Jonah leaned back in his chair. How many girls died in that workhouse while those good Christian women walked past? How many starved or froze or just gave up because the whole town decided they were worth less than livestock? Clara thought of Sarah, who'd slept in the cot next to hers. Sarah who'd gotten sick from the damp and cold, who'd begged for a doctor, for medicine, for anything. Sarah who'd died whispering her daughter's name, a daughter taken away because poor women weren't fit to raise children. "At least 12 that I knew personally," she said quietly. "Probably more." "Then no. You weren't too harsh. If anything, you were too kind." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She stood at her window, watching clouds scud across the moon, thinking about kindness and cruelty and the space between them. A soft knock at her door made her turn. "Come in." Jonah entered, carrying something wrapped in oilcloth. "Couldn't sleep either?" "Too much thinking." "That'll do it." He held out the bundle. "This is for you." "Was going to wait for winter, but seems like you might need it now." Clara unwrapped it carefully and gasped. It was a coat, thick wool, lined with fur, with buttons made from antler. The craftsmanship was beautiful, each stitch perfect and strong. "Where did you get this?" "Made it." "Well, had it made." "There's a native woman lives about 10 miles north, trades sewing for meat sometimes. Asked her to make it special." "When?" "Started it the day after I brought you here." Clara ran her fingers over the soft fur lining. "But you didn't know if I'd stay." "No, but I hoped you would." She looked up at him, this large, quiet man who'd bought her for $1 and treated her like she was worth infinitely more. "Why?" "You asked me that before." "You never really answered." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer this time either. Then, "You know what the hardest thing about living up here is?" Clara waited. "It's not the cold or the isolation or the danger. It's the silence. Not the actual quiet. I like that. But the silence where conversation should be. The silence where laughter should live. The silence that reminds you you're alone by choice because the alternative is worse." He moved to her window, looking out at the same moon she'd been watching. "When I saw you on that platform, you had this look, like you'd accepted the silence, like you'd made peace with it, and I thought maybe two people who understood silence might make something better than noise together." Clara joined him at the window, close enough to feel his warmth, but not touching. "And have we?" "You tell me. You're the one who just faced down the entire town establishment in Murphy's store." "That wasn't about you. That was about me." "I know. That's what made it perfect." They stood together in comfortable quiet, watching the night world through glass and moonlight. Finally, Clara said, "The coat is beautiful." "Thank you. It'll keep you warm." "It's already doing that." He glanced at her, and she realized she was holding it against her chest like armor, like comfort, like hope. "I should let you sleep," he said, moving toward the door. "Jonah?" He paused. "The silence doesn't bother me anymore. Not the kind up here, anyway." "No?" "No, this isn't the silence of being alone. It's the quiet of being understood." Something crossed his face, surprise maybe, or recognition. "Good night, Clara." "Good night." After he left, Clara tried on the coat. It fit perfectly, as she'd known it would. Jonah paid attention to things like that, size and shape, and what would work. He saw what was, not what should be. She thought about his words, two people who understood silence making something better than noise. Was that what they were doing? Building something? And if so, what? The next morning brought the first real storm of autumn. Rain lashed against the windows, and wind howled through the trees like a living thing. Jonah came in soaked from checking on the animals, water streaming from his hair and beard. "River's rising," he said, stripping off his wet coat. "If this keeps up, the lower crossing will flood." "Is that bad?" "Could be. Means we're cut off from town until it goes down." Clara tried to feel concerned about that and couldn't manage it. Oh no. How terrible. However will we survive without Mrs. Clearwater's disapproval? Jonah smiled, a real smile that transformed his whole face. "You're not much of a town person, are you?" "I wasn't even before the workhouse. My parents kept to themselves mostly. Mother said gossip was poisonous to the soul." "Smart woman." She was. Clara poured him hot coffee, watched him wrap his large hands around the mug for warmth. "Tell me about yours." "Your mother." "Not much to tell. She was gentle in a world that didn't value gentleness, tried to make beauty where there wasn't any, grew flowers in the desert, taught poetry to farm kids, loved my father despite his temper." He had a temper. He had demons. The war broke something in him that never healed right. Mother tried to love it better, but some things can't be fixed with love alone. "Is that why you live alone? Because you think you have the same demons?" Jonah looked at her sharply. "What makes you think I have demons?" "Everyone who's seen too much has them. The question is whether you feed them or starve them." "And which do I do?" Clara considered. "Starve them, I think. But maybe that's just another kind of feeding." Before he could respond, a crack of thunder shook the cabin, and the rain intensified. They spent the day inside, Jonah repairing harnesses while Clara worked on her winter clothes. The storm created a cocoon around them, sealing them off from the rest of the world. As she sewed, Clara found herself humming, an old hymn her mother used to sing. She hadn't realized she was doing it until Jonah said, "That's pretty." "Sorry, I didn't mean to—" "Don't apologize, it's nice. This place hasn't had music in it since I built it." "You don't sing?" "Not so anyone would want to hear it." "Sing something anyway." "You first." Properly, not just humming. Clara set down her sewing. She hadn't sung properly in years, not since her mother's funeral. But something about the storm, the warmth, the safety of this moment made her brave. She sang Amazing Grace, her voice rusty at first but growing stronger. The words filled the cabin, rising above the storm, creating their own kind of shelter. When she finished, Jonah was staring at her. "What?" "You have a beautiful voice. It's just singing." "No," he said quietly. "It's not just anything." The storm lasted 3 days, 3 days of being trapped inside together, and yet Clara never felt trapped. They talked more in those 3 days than in all the previous weeks combined. She told him about her childhood, the little house where her mother taught her to read, the father who'd loved them both but loved whiskey more. He told her about traveling west, the things he'd seen, the reasons he'd stopped traveling. On the third night, the storm finally exhausted itself, leaving behind a world washed clean. Clara stood on the porch, breathing in the sharp, pine-scented air, watching stars emerge between racing clouds. "It's beautiful," she said as Jonah joined her. "It is. I never want to leave." The words surprised her, but as soon as she said them, she knew they were true. This place, this life, this strange partnership, it was more home than she'd ever had. "Then don't," Jonah said simply. "My contract's only for a year. Contract's just paper. You stay or go because you choose to, not because some paper says so. And if I choose to stay, then you stay." "Just like that?" "Just like that." Clara turned to look at him. "What about you? What do you choose?" "I chose the day I saw you on that platform. Everything since has just been waiting for you to choose, too." Before Clara could respond, a sound cut through the night, horses approaching, several of them, moving fast. Jonah's whole demeanor changed, shifting from relaxed to alert in an instant. "Get inside." "Jonah, inside, now. Lock the door and don't open it. unless you hear my voice say it's safe." Clara did as he said, her heart racing. Through the window, she watched Jonah step off the porch, rifle in hand. The horses came into view, 5 riders, all armed, their faces hidden by darkness. "That's far enough?" Jonah called out. The lead rider pushed back his hat, and Clara recognized Sheriff Hawley. "Cutter, we need to talk." "So talk." "It's about the girl." Clara Boone. Clara's blood went cold. Had the town decided to take her back? Had her defiance in the store convinced them she needed to be put back in her place? "What about her?" Jonah's voice was dangerously flat. "There's been a development. Something you both need to know." The sheriff dismounted, hands visible and away from his weapons. "Can we talk inside? This isn't a conversation for the dark." Jonah was still for a long moment, then, "Clara, open the door." She did, and the men filed in. Besides the sheriff, there was the town lawyer, Mr. Garrett, and 3 men Clara didn't recognize. They looked official, uncomfortable, and tired. "Miss Boone," Sheriff Hawley said, removing his hat, "these men are from Denver. They've been looking for you." "For me?" Clara's voice came out higher than intended. "Why?" One of the strangers, an older man with silver hair and kind eyes, stepped forward. "Miss Boone, my name is James Worthington. I'm an attorney with Worthington and Associates in Denver. I've been searching for you for 6 months." "I don't understand." Mr. Worthington pulled out a document. "Did you know your mother had a sister in Boston?" Clara shook her head. "Mother never mentioned family. Said they disowned her when she married my father." That was true for most of them. But your aunt, Margaret Sinclair, never forgot her sister, never forgave the family for casting her out. When Mrs. Sinclair died 8 months ago, she left very specific instructions in her will. He handed Clara the document. The words swam before her eyes, but one number stood out: $20,000. "This is a mistake," Clara said faintly. "This has to be a mistake." "No mistake. Margaret Sinclair left her entire estate to her sister's daughter, you, the only living reminder of the sister she loved and lost." Clara sank into a chair, her legs unable to hold her. $20,000. A fortune. Enough to live comfortably for the rest of her life. "We've been searching for you since the will was executed," Mr. Worthington continued. "The trail led to Ironwood, but you disappeared from the workhouse. It was only when Mrs. Clearwater contacted us about your current situation that we knew where to find you." "Mrs. Clearwater?" Clara laughed bitterly. "Of course. She couldn't stand that I talked back to her." "Actually," Sheriff Hawley said uncomfortably, "she was concerned. Said you seemed changed. Wanted to make sure you knew about the inheritance before you made any permanent decisions." Clara looked at Jonah, who'd remained silent throughout the conversation. His face was unreadable. "There are papers to sign," Mr. Worthington said. "Formalities to complete. You'll need to come to Denver to finalize everything. And then? Then you're a wealthy woman, Miss Boone. Free to go wherever you wish, do whatever you please. Free." The word should have filled her with joy. Instead, she felt only a hollow ache. "When?" "We can leave tomorrow if you're ready." "I need time. To think, to understand what this means." "Of course. We'll stay in town tonight. You can give us your decision in the morning." After they left, Clara and Jonah stood in silence. The cabin that had felt so warm and safe now felt fragile, temporary. "Well," Jonah said finally, "seems you have a choice to make." "I don't want it," Clara said. "The money." "I don't want it." "Don't be foolish. It's enough to set you up for life. You could go anywhere, be anyone." "I don't want to be anyone else. I want to be who I am here." "And who's that?" "I don't know yet, but I was starting to find out." Jonah moved to the fireplace, adding a log with unnecessary force. "You can't stay here now." "Why not?" "Because staying would be choosing poverty when you have wealth, choosing isolation when you could have society. Choosing." He stopped. "Choosing you?" He turned to face her. "A dollar bargain made sense when you had nothing. But now? What kind of man would I be to hold you to that?" You're not holding me to anything. You said yourself, I stay or go by choice. That was before you had 20,000 choices to make instead. Clara stood, moving toward him. Money doesn't change what I want. Doesn't it? You could buy a house in any city in the country, travel to Europe, live like the ladies who sneered at you in Murphy's store. I've seen how those ladies live. It doesn't appeal to me. You say that now. I say that because I mean it. She reached for his hand, surprised when he let her take it. Jonah, you gave me something no amount of money could buy. You gave me dignity, respect, a place where I could remember who I was before the world tried to break me. That's just common decency. No. Common decency would have been treating me well for the dollar you paid. You did more. You saw me as a person worth saving, even when I couldn't see it myself. Clara, I don't want to leave, but I understand if you want me to. If having some rich woman playing at being poor would ruin what you've built here. He stopped her words by pulling her against him, his arms wrapping around her in the first real embrace they'd shared. Clara melted into it, feeling safer than she'd ever felt. You impossible woman, he murmured into her hair. Don't you understand? I don't want you to go, but I can't be the reason you stay. Not when you have the chance for so much more. Then let me make this simple, Clara said, pulling back to look at him. I'll go to Denver. I'll sign the papers, claim the money, and then I'll come back if you'll have me. Not as someone you bought for $1, but as someone who chooses to be here. And if you get to Denver and realize there's a whole world waiting for you, then I'll see that world and still choose this one. She touched his face, feeling the rough beard, the warm skin beneath, because this is the only world where I've ever been myself. He caught her hand, held it against his cheek. You really are impossible. Is that a yes? That's a, we'll see. Go to Denver. See what your choices really are. Then decide. I've already decided. Decide again with all the facts. He released her hand, stepped back. If you come back, it won't be because of a contract or obligation or having nowhere else to go. It'll be because you want this life, knowing exactly what you're giving up. Clara wanted to argue, but she saw the wisdom in his words. She needed to go to Denver, needed to see what $20,000 really meant before she could honestly say she was choosing this mountain cabin over everything else. All right, she said. I'll go. But Jonah? Yeah? I'm coming back. He smiled sadly. We'll see. The morning Clara left for Denver, frost covered everything in crystalline perfection. She stood on the porch wearing the coat Jonah had given her, watching him saddle Brutus for the ride to town. Her single carpet bag, containing her few handmade dresses and her mother's wooden bird, sat by her feet. You don't have to take me, she said. Mr. Worthington offered to send a carriage. I'm taking you. His tone brooked no argument. They rode in silence, Clara pressed against his back one last time, memorizing the feel of it. The solid warmth, the steady breathing, the way he shifted to accommodate her without thinking. She wondered if she'd ever feel this safe again. At the edge of town, where Mr. Worthington's carriage waited, Jonah helped her down. His hands lingered on her waist for just a moment. Clara, he started, then stopped. I know, she said. I'll see the world. I'll look at all my options. I'll make an informed choice. That's not what I was going to say. What then? He pulled something from his pocket, a small leather pouch. This was my mother's. She always said it would bring its owner home, no matter how far they wandered. Clara opened it carefully. Inside was a compass, old but well-maintained, its face inscribed with delicate flowers. Jonah, I can't take it. Even if you don't come back, at least you'll always know which direction leads here. Before she could respond, he mounted Brutus and rode away, not looking back. Clara stood there clutching the compass, watching until he disappeared into the trees. Miss Boone? Mr. Worthington stood beside the carriage. We should go if we're to make Denver before dark. Clara climbed into the carriage, feeling like she was leaving parts of herself scattered along the mountain trail. As they rolled through town, she saw faces in windows. Mrs. Clearwater, Mrs. Henderson, Tom Bradley, all watching the workhouse girl ride away in a fancy carriage, off to claim her fortune. The irony of it burned. These people who wouldn't spare her a kind word when she was worthless suddenly seemed very interested now that she had money. The journey to Denver took 8 hours, and with each mile, Clara felt the mountain's pull weakening. Not disappearing, never that, but fading to a constant ache rather than sharp pain. Mr. Worthington tried to make conversation, telling her about her aunt, about Boston, about the estate. Clara listened with half an ear, her thumb rubbing the smooth surface of Jonah's compass. Denver was overwhelming. Buildings taller than trees, more people on one street than lived in all of Ironwood, the constant noise of progress and ambition. Mr. Worthington had arranged a room at the Grand Hotel, a place so fancy Clara was afraid to touch anything. "We'll meet with the bank president tomorrow," Mr. Worthington explained. "Sign the papers, transfer the funds. Then you'll need to decide what to do with it all." That night, Clara sat in a copper bathtub in her hotel room, surrounded by more luxury than she'd ever imagined, and felt emptier than she had in the workhouse. She missed the simple tin tub at the cabin, missed heating water on the stove, missed the mountain silence that wasn't really silent at all. The next morning, dressed in a new dress Mr. Worthington had arranged for her, "You need to look the part of an heiress," he'd said. Clara sat in the bank president's office and signed her name to document after document. With each signature, she became wealthier and felt poorer. "Congratulations, Miss Boone," the bank president said, pumping her hand enthusiastically. "You're now one of the wealthiest women in Colorado. What will you do first?" "I need to send a telegram," Clara said, but when she sat in the telegraph office, she couldn't find the words. What could she say that would fit in a few lines? That money meant nothing? That she'd rather be cooking stew in his cabin than eating in Denver's finest restaurants? That she missed him with an ache that $20,000 couldn't touch? In the end, she sent just 3 words. "Still choosing you." She never got a reply. A week passed. Mr. Worthington introduced her to Denver society, or tried to. Clara attended one tea party, where the ladies treated her like an exotic curiosity. The workhouse girl made good. They asked about her ordeal with barely concealed eagerness, wanting sordid details to gossip about later. "It must have been horrible," one woman said, patting Clara's hand with false sympathy. "Being sold like that, and to such a frightening man." "Actually," Clara said, setting down her teacup with a decisive click, "it was the best thing that ever happened to me." The shocked silence that followed made her smile. She lasted 2 more weeks. 2 weeks of hotels and restaurants and shops where clerks fawned over her money while their eyes judged her size, her rough hands, her mountain-straight way of talking. 2 weeks of people calling her Miss Boone with respect they didn't feel, wanting her money but not her company. The morning she decided to leave, she was having breakfast in the hotel dining room when she heard 2 men at the next table discussing something that made her blood run cold. "Indian trouble up near Ironwood," one said. "Heard the army's been called in. 'Bout time. Those savages have been getting too bold, attacking honest settlers. Heard there was some kind of raid near Devil's Ridge. Burned a cabin, killed the owner." Clara's coffee cup shattered on the floor. Devil's Ridge. That was Jonah's mountain. She was on a horse within the hour, having bought the fastest one she could find and changed into her sturdy mountain clothes. Mr. Worthington tried to stop her. "Miss Boone, be reasonable. You can't just ride off into danger. Watch me. At least take an escort. No time." She swung into the saddle, grateful for the riding lessons Jonah had given her. "If anyone asks, I've gone home." She rode hard, stopping only to rest the horse and drink water. The journey that had taken 8 hours by carriage took her 6 on horseback, pushing both herself and the animal to their limits. As she climbed into the foothills, she began to see smoke on the horizon. Not Jonah's cabin. Please, not his cabin. The sun was setting when she reached the turnoff to his property. Her heart hammered as she guided the exhausted horse up the familiar trail. Through the trees, she could see the cabin. Still standing, intact. But there was smoke coming from somewhere beyond it, and voices, multiple voices, coming from inside. Clara dismounted quietly, tying the horse a safe distance away. She crept closer, her hand finding the small knife she'd bought in Denver. Through the window, she could see soldiers, 4 of them, ransacking the cabin, looking for something or someone. "He's got to be hiding them somewhere," one soldier said. "No way he wasn't involved. Captain says to burn it if we don't find anything." "Shame. It's a nice place. It belongs to an Indian lover." "Burn it." Clara's mind raced. Where was Jonah? What were they looking for? And who were them? A sound from the barn caught her attention. Soft, quickly muffled, but definitely human. A child's whimper. Moving as quietly as she could, Clara circled around to the barn. The door was slightly open. Inside, in the dim light, she saw them. Jonah sat against the wall, blood seeping from a wound in his shoulder. Beside him, a native woman clutched a child. A boy, maybe 2 years old, with dark hair and frightened eyes. "Jonah," Clara breathed. His head snapped up, and the relief in his eyes nearly broke her. "Clara? What are you? You can't be here. It's not safe. I heard about the trouble. I came back." She knelt beside him, assessing the wound. "How bad?" "Bullet's still in there. But that's not the problem." He nodded toward the woman and child. "This is Nalia. Her husband was killed by soldiers 3 days ago. She came here because he was my friend. We served together before. I promised I'd protect his family if anything happened." Clara looked at Nalia, saw her own terror reflected in the woman's eyes. "And the soldiers? They're hunting survivors. Claim her band attacked a wagon train, but it's a lie. They were peaceful, camped for winter. Someone wanted their land, so—" He winced as he shifted. "Same old story. We need to get you all out of here. Can't move fast enough with this shoulder, and they're watching all the trails." Clara's mind worked rapidly. "How long before they check the barn?" "They already did once. Missed the false back I built last year, but they'll look harder next time. Then we need a distraction." Clara stood. "Stay hidden. No matter what you hear, stay hidden." "Clara, no." But she was already gone, running back toward the cabin. She took a deep breath, then burst through the front door. "Oh, thank God," she cried. "There are people here. Please, you have to help me." The soldiers spun around, weapons raised. "Who are you?" "Clara Boone, I own this place." "Well, I did. I mean—" She let herself become hysterical, not entirely an act. "I was in Denver, and I heard about the Indian attacks, and I came back to check on my property, but there's smoke everywhere, and I got lost, and—" "Your property." The sergeant looked skeptical. "This cabin belongs to Jonah Cutter." "Not anymore." Clara pulled out the bank documents she'd been carrying, hands shaking. "I bought it from him 3 weeks ago, see? All legal and proper. He said he was moving on, heading north. I paid him, well, a lot of money for it." The soldiers examined the papers. Clara had altered them on the ride, changing details to show a property purchase instead of an inheritance claim. Her forgery skills, learned from watching her mother correct documents when creditors made mistakes, held up under scrutiny. "Why would you buy this place?" one soldier asked. "Have you seen the view?" Clara laughed, high and nervous. "And the isolation. After what I've been through, I was a workhouse girl, you see, in Ironwood. I inherited money from an aunt and wanted somewhere nobody could ever force me to leave again." The soldiers exchanged glances. The story was just strange enough to be true. "You haven't seen Cutter?" "Not for 3 weeks." "Is he in trouble?" She widened her eyes. "Oh God, he's not one of the Indian sympathizers, is he? He seemed so, well, frightening, but honest. He's been harboring hostiles. We have reports." "Harboring here? In my cabin?" Clara let outrage creep into her voice. "That bastard? He sold me a property knowing it would make me a target?" The sergeant relaxed slightly. Her indignation seemed genuine because it partially was. She was furious, just not at Jonah. "We need to search the property again, ma'am." "Of course! Search everything. I don't want any hostiles on my land." She shuddered dramatically. "Would you like some coffee while you search?" I was just about to make some. For the next hour, Clara played the perfect hostess, keeping the soldiers focused on her and the cabin while Jonah, Nalia, and the child remained hidden. She chattered nervously about Denver, about her plans for the property, about anything except what really mattered. Finally, as full dark fell, the sergeant said, "We need to move on. Other properties to check. Ma'am, you shouldn't stay here alone. It's not safe." "Oh, I'm not staying, what? Just wanted to check on things. I'll head back to town tonight. We'll escort you." "That's very kind." She rode with them for 5 miles until they reached the main trail where they'd split off to check other cabins. As soon as they were out of sight, she doubled back, riding hard through the darkness. The barn was empty when she returned, but she found them in the cabin. Jonah had managed to move them inside once the soldiers left. He was slumped in a chair, face gray with pain and blood loss. "You magnificent, impossible woman," he said when he saw her. "Save the compliments. We need to get that bullet out." Clara turned to Nalia, who was holding her son tight. "Do you speak English?" "Yes," the woman said softly. "Thomas, my husband, taught me." "Good. I need your help. Boil water, find clean cloth. We need to work fast." For the next hour, Clara did things she'd never imagined herself capable of. She dug a bullet out of Jonah's shoulder while he bit down on a leather strap to keep from screaming. She cleaned and stitched the wound with hands that barely shook. She gave orders like someone who knew what she was doing, even though she was making it up as she went along. When it was over, Jonah was unconscious but breathing steadily. Clara collapsed in a chair, blood on her hands and dress, exhaustion hitting her like a physical blow. "You came back," Nalia said quietly. "Jonah said you would not. Said you had money now, a new life. This is my life." Clara looked at the unconscious man who'd bought her for $1 and given her everything. "He just hasn't figured that out yet." The child, Eli, Nalia called him, whimpered in his sleep. Clara watched Nalia soothe him and felt something fierce rise in her chest. These people were being hunted for the crime of existing, just like she'd been punished for the crime of being poor. "You can't stay here," Clara said. "The soldiers will come back." "Where can we go?" "They watch all paths." Clara thought of the $20,000 sitting in a Denver bank. Money she didn't want, hadn't earned, felt guilty for having. But maybe it could buy something worthwhile. "I have an idea," she said. "But we need Jonah awake for it to work." He woke near dawn, fever bright but coherent. Clara explained her plan while he listened, face expressionless. "You want to what?" he said when she finished. "Buy land. Lots of it. All the land around this cabin, actually. Make it private property that the army can't search without cause." "That's insane." "That's money. Amazing what it can do when you have enough of it." Clara fit. "I also want to legally adopt Eli." Everyone stared at her. "Think about it," she continued. "A white woman with legal custody of an Indian child? They can't take him without cause. And if Nalia is his governess, hired to help care for him, she has legal right to be here too." "They'll never allow it," Nalia said. "They will if I pay enough. And if I throw around my aunt's Boston society connections." Clara smiled grimly. "Amazing how a Boston address makes people assume you're respectable." Jonah struggled to sit up. "You'd do this? Risk everything? What everything? The money I don't want? The Denver society that looks at me like I'm a curiosity? The life everyone thinks I should want?" Clara shook her head. "I told you I was coming back. This just gives me a better reason." It took 3 days to set everything in motion. 3 days of Clara riding back and forth to town, throwing money and legal threats at anyone who objected. She hired Mr. Garrett, the town lawyer, for an obscene sum. She sent telegrams to Boston, name-dropping her aunt's connections. She played the part of an eccentric heiress with more money than sense, adopting an orphan out of Christian charity. The funny thing was, the more unreasonable she acted, the more people believed her. Rich people apparently were expected to be unreasonable. The adoption papers were the hardest. Sheriff Hawley himself came to investigate. "You want to adopt an Indian child?" He looked deeply suspicious. "He's half white," Clara lied smoothly. "His father was a missionary. Died trying to bring Christ to the heathens. The least I can do is save his son from a similar fate." "And the mother?" "Dead in the raids. The woman I've hired is his aunt, only living relative. Would you have me separate them?" The sheriff clearly didn't believe her, But the papers were legal, the money was real, and the territorial governor who owed Jonah a favor from years back, though the sheriff didn't know that, had already signed off on it. Within a week, Clara owned 300 acres of mountain land, had legal custody of Eli, and had hired Nalia as a live-in governess. All neat, legal, and proper. The morning the last papers were signed, Clara stood on the porch, watching Eli play in the garden while Nalia sang to him in her own language. Jonah, still weak but healing, sat in the rocking chair beside her. "You've lost your mind," he said conversationally. "Probably. Spent a fortune on land you don't need and a child who isn't yours. True. Made yourself a target for every Indian hater in the territory. Most likely. Why?" Clara turned to look at him. "You bought me for $1 when everyone said I was worthless. Did you really think I wouldn't return the favor? That's different." "How?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I had nothing to lose." "Neither did I, until you gave me something worth keeping." She gestured to the cabin, the land, the family they'd somehow assembled. "This, all of this." "Clara, I love you." The words hung in the mountain air like morning mist. Jonah went very still. "I know you probably don't feel the same," Clara continued, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I know I'm not what anyone would choose, too big, too loud, too much of everything, but I love you, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise." "Too much?" Jonah stood carefully, favoring his injured shoulder, and moved to face her. "Clara, you're not too much. You're exactly enough. You're—" He stopped, struggling for words. "That day at the auction, I didn't buy you to save you." "No? I bought you to save myself." His hand touched her face, gentle as falling snow. "I'd been alone so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to be human. Then I saw you, proud and unbroken, despite everything, and I thought, maybe two broken people could make something whole. And have we?" Instead of answering, he kissed her. It was careful, tentative, like he was afraid she might disappear. Clara made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob and kissed him back with all the fierce joy in her heart. When they pulled apart, Eli was tugging at Clara's skirt, holding up a wooden bird he'd found, her mother's carving, somehow migrated from her room to his small hands. "Pretty," he said in his baby voice. Clara picked him up, settling him on her hip. "Yes, it is pretty. It was my mama's." "Mama," Eli repeated, patting Clara's cheek. Nalia approached, smiling softly. "He's decided you're his mother now." "Both of us, I think." Are you comfortable with that?" Clara asked. "In our culture, children have many mothers. All the women of the tribe help raise them." Nalia touched Eli's hair gently. He could have no better second mother than the woman who risked everything to keep him safe. That night, they sat around the dinner table like a real family. Unlikely, impossible, but real. Jonah told stories that made Eli giggle. Nalia taught them words in her language. Clara served food she'd cooked with her own hands in the kitchen she'd made her own. Later, after Eli was asleep and Nalia had retired to the room they'd fixed up for her, Clara and Jonah sat on the porch watching stars appear. "This won't be easy," Jonah said. "People will talk. They'll judge. They might do worse." "Let them try." Clara's voice was steel. "I've been judged my whole life. At least now I have something worth being judged for. The money is doing exactly what money should do. Protecting people who need protecting, making a safe place in an unsafe world. You could have had so much more." "Like what? A big house in Denver where I'd be alone? Pretty dresses to cover up the fact that nobody sees me as anything but the workhouse girl who got lucky?" Clara shook her head. "This is more. This is everything." A week later, trouble came calling again. Not soldiers this time, but townspeople. A delegation of Ironwood's finest citizens, led by Mrs. Clearwater and the sheriff. Clara met them in the yard, Jonah beside her, rifle prominently displayed, though not quite pointed at anyone. "Miss Boone," Mrs. Clearwater began, We've come to express our concern about your situation. How thoughtful. Would you like some tea? This is not a social call. You're harboring Indians. I'm raising my legally adopted son with the help of his governess. All properly documented, as I'm sure Sheriff Hawley can confirm. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. The papers are legal, but what? You don't like it? You think an Indian child doesn't deserve a home? Clara's voice rose. Where was this concern when I was on that auction block? Where was this civic interest when workhouse girls were dying of cold and hunger? That's different, Mrs. Clearwater started. You're right. It is different. Those girls were white, so you felt comfortable ignoring their suffering. This child is Indian, so you feel comfortable causing his suffering. How dare you? How dare I what? Tell the truth? Use my money the way I choose? Refuse to be the grateful little charity case you expected me to be? Mr. Bradley, Tom's father, stepped forward. Miss Boone, you must understand the position you're putting the town in. If word gets out that Ironwood is harboring, then I'll make sure word gets out about something else, Clara interrupted, like how the banker's son frequents the brothels in Denver, or how Mrs. Clearwater's husband waters down milk, or how Sheriff Hawley took bribes to look the other way when those wagon trains were actually raided by white men dressed as Indians. The silence was deafening. Sheriff Hawley's face went white. You can't prove, can't I? Clara smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. Amazing what people will tell you when you have money to spend. Private investigators, former soldiers with guilty consciences, working girls with good memories, they all have stories to tell. You're threatening us. Mrs. Clearwater gasped. I'm informing you. You leave my family alone. I leave yours alone. Simple as that. Family? Tom Bradley laughed. A mountain man, a fat workhouse girl, and some Indian brat? That's not a family. The rifle in Jonah's hand shifted slightly. Tom stepped back. You're right, Clara said. We're not a family, by your definition. We're something better. We're people who chose each other, who protect each other, who see each other's worth when the rest of the world doesn't. She moved closer to the delegation. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave. You're going to forget about my son and his governess. And if anyone threatens them or tries to take them, I will use every penny of my inheritance to destroy you, legally, financially, socially. I will make what happened to my mother look like mercy. Clara, Jonah said quietly, a warning in his voice. She ignored him. I spent 3 years in that workhouse watching you good people walk by. 3 years of being worth less than the dirt you scraped off your boots. Well, now I have power, and I promise you, I remember every face that turned away, every voice that laughed, every hand that didn't reach out to help. Mrs. Clearwater's face was pale. You wouldn't try me. Clara's voice was soft now, which somehow made it more frightening. I have nothing left to lose and everything to protect. That makes me dangerous in ways you can't even imagine. The delegation left quickly after that, Mrs. Clearwater barely maintaining her dignity as she hurried to her carriage. Sheriff Hawley lingered for a moment. This isn't over, he said quietly. No, Clara agreed, but the next move is yours. Choose wisely. After they were gone, Jonah set down his rifle and pulled Clara into his arms. You magnificent, terrifying woman. Too much? Never. He kissed her forehead. Though you might have just started a war. Then we'd better be ready to fight it. That night, as Clara tucked Eli into his bed, a proper bed she'd had made specially for him, he grabbed her hand. Mama stay? Mama's staying, Clara promised. Always. From the doorway, Nalia watched with tears in her eyes. You know what you've done, don't you? Made yourself an enemy of everyone. Not everyone, Clara said, thinking of Jonah waiting in their room now, officially, as of 3 nights ago when he'd carried her over the threshold like a proper bride, dollar auction be damned. Just the people who never saw my worth anyway. And if they come for us? Then they'll learn what a dollar can buy when it's invested properly. Clara kissed Eli's forehead, then stood. It bought me freedom. Now it's going to buy him safety. And if that's not enough, she smiled, and it was the smile of a woman who'd found her strength. Well, I learned a few things in that workhouse. How to fight dirty, how to survive anything, how to protect what's mine. Are we yours? Nalia asked softly. If you want to be. This home is yours as long as you need it. Eli is my son in every way that matters, but he's your blood, your heritage. We'll raise him together, teach him both worlds, give him choices I never had. Nalia moved forward and embraced Clara, the first time she'd initiated contact. Sister, she said in her language, then translated. That's what you are now. Sister. Later, lying beside Jonah in their bed, Clara traced the scar on his shoulder where she'd dug out the bullet. Regrets? He asked. Never. Not even about the money? You could have been a lady of leisure. Clara laughed. Can you imagine me as a lady of leisure? I'd die of boredom in a week. What about safety? You've made enemies today. I've had enemies my whole life. Poverty, hunger, cruelty. At least these enemies have faces. Jonah rolled to face her. You know I love you, don't you? I should have said it earlier, but you showed it every day, in every action. Words are nice, but actions are truth. Then let me show you again. He kissed her, deep and sure, and Clara melted into it. This man who'd bought her for $1 and given her priceless things, dignity, purpose, family, love. Outside, snow began to fall. The first real snow of winter. It would be a hard season, Clara knew. There would be challenges, threats, dangers she couldn't yet imagine. But inside this cabin, with her unlikely family, she'd never felt warmer. The next morning brought a surprise. A wagon pulled up to the cabin, and out stepped someone Clara never expected to see, Mrs. Patterson from the workhouse. Not a guard, but one of the older women who'd been there for decades, institutionalized beyond hope of freedom. Mrs. Patterson, Clara ran out, not even grabbing a coat. What are you doing here? The old woman smiled, tears running down her weathered face. You did it, girl. You actually did it. Did what? Bought the workhouse. Clara stared. I didn't. Your lawyer did on your behalf. Bought it and shut it down. All the girls are free. The sick ones are in the hospital. The others got money to start over. Not much, but enough. Mrs. Patterson grabbed Clara's hands. You saved them all. Clara turned to look at Jonah, who was standing on the porch with an expression she couldn't read. Did you know about this? I might have sent Mr. Garrett a suggestion. Your money, though. Your choice. But I didn't choose, didn't you? You chose to protect people who needed protecting. This seemed like a natural extension. Mrs. Patterson was still talking, something about the girls wanting to thank her, about some of them hoping for work, about the building being turned into a school. Clara heard it all distantly, her mind spinning. A school? Your lawyer said you'd want that. Said your mother would have wanted it. Free school for poor children, so they don't end up like we did. Clara sank onto the porch steps, overwhelmed. I can't run a school. No, but I can, Mrs. Patterson said. Taught plenty of girls their letters over the years. With proper resources, real books, actual food for the children, we could change things. We? Some of the other women want to help. We're too old to start over, but not too old to teach. She looked at Clara with hope. If you'll have us. Clara thought about her mother, teaching poetry to a daughter by candlelight. About Jonah's mother, teaching Shakespeare to farm children. About education being the one thing they couldn't take from you, except when they could, when poverty stole even that. Yes, she said. God, yes. The school opened a month later. The Clara Boone School for Children. She'd wanted to name it after her mother, but Mrs. Patterson insisted. 20 students the first day, 40 by the end of the week. Poor children, immigrant children, even a few native children whose parents were brave enough to risk it. Clara taught there sometimes when she could get away from the ranch. That's what they called it now. The Mercy Ridge Ranch, all 300 acres of it. She taught poetry and writing while Mrs. Patterson handled arithmetic and reading. Nalia taught native crafts and stories. carefully, quietly, to those who wanted to learn. Eli grew strong and bright, toddling between his two mothers, speaking English and Lakota in equal measure. Jonah taught him to track, to ride, to respect the mountain. Clara taught him letters, numbers, the power of words. The threats came, of course. Anonymous letters, burned crosses once, a shot fired through the window that winter night when the snow was thick and silence heavy. But each threat was met with response: legal action from Clara's Boston lawyers, investigations from Denver reporters she'd cultivated, pressure from the territorial governor who owed Jonah more favors than anyone knew, and support came too, quiet but real. Other ranchers who'd been helped by Jonah over the years, former workhouse girls who'd found new lives, native families who saw a safe haven, even some townspeople, the ones who'd always felt the auction was wrong but hadn't known how to stop it. Spring arrived late that year, but when it came, it brought more than wildflowers and melting snow. It brought a reckoning that would change everything. Clara was in the garden with Eli, teaching him to plant seeds when she saw the riders approaching. Not soldiers this time, nor townspeople. These were different, official-looking men in dark suits, too clean for the mountain trails, too formal for friendly visits. "Eli, go find your other mama," Clara said quietly, never taking her eyes off the approaching strangers. The boy, now 3 and quick as a rabbit, darted toward the cabin where Nalia was baking bread. Jonah emerged from the barn, rifle in hand but pointed down. He moved to stand beside Clara, a united front against whatever was coming. The lead rider, a thin man with spectacles and the bearing of someone used to authority, dismounted carefully. "Mrs. Cutter?" "Miss Boone," Clara corrected, though she wore Jonah's ring on her finger, a simple band he'd carved from elk antler during the long winter nights. They'd married in their own way, with Nalia as witness and Eli as ring bearer, but the law wouldn't recognize it anyway, not with Jonah's reputation. "Miss Boone, then. I'm James Whitfield from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. We need to discuss the child." Clara's blood went cold, but her voice stayed steady. "What child?" "The Indian child you're harboring. Eli, I believe you call him." "I call him son," as the legal documents clearly state. Whitfield pulled out a sheaf of papers. "Yes, about those documents. There have been questions raised about their legitimacy, about the child's true parentage. His parents are dead. I've adopted him." End of story. Not quite. Whitfield adjusted his spectacles. "You see, we've received information that the child's father was not, in fact, a missionary as you claimed, that he was actually a native scout named Thomas Running Bear, who was killed while helping the army track hostile bands." Clara kept her face neutral, though inside she was calculating rapidly. Someone had talked. But who? And how much did they really know? "Even if that were true," she said carefully, "it doesn't change the adoption. I have legal custody. Obtained through false pretenses. That voids the agreement." Whitfield's smile was thin and unpleasant. "The child will need to come with us. There's a reservation school in Kansas where he'll be properly educated, civilized." "Over my dead body," Jonah said quietly. The other men with Whitfield shifted nervously. Everyone knew Jonah Cutter's reputation, even federal bureaucrats. "Mr. Cutter, I'd advise against threatening federal agents." "I'm not threatening. I'm stating a fact. That boy doesn't leave this property unless it's over my dead body." "And mine," Clara added, "and his mother's. Are you prepared for that level of bloodshed, Mr. Whitfield? Because I assure you we are." Whitfield's composure cracked slightly. "You can't fight the federal government, Miss Boone, no matter how much money you have." "Can't I?" Clara smiled, but it was all teeth. "My aunt's family has connections in Washington, senators who owe favors, newspaper publishers who'd love a story about government agents stealing children from loving homes. How do you think that will play in the Eastern papers? Government rips child from arms of Boston heiress. You're not from Boston, but my money is, and money talks louder than truth in those circles, doesn't it?" Before Whitfield could respond, Nalia emerged from the cabin with Eli on her hip. The boy saw the strangers and buried his face in her neck, whimpering. "Don't let them take me, Mama," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Never, my heart. Nalia said in perfect English, looking directly at Whitfield. No one is taking you anywhere. Whitfield studied them all. The mountain man with his rifle, the large woman with her fierce eyes, the native woman holding the mixed-blood child, all standing together like they belonged that way. This isn't over, he said finally. We'll be back. With proper authority. With force, if necessary. Then you'll be met with force, Clara said. Every penny I have will go to lawyers. Every connection I can call on will be used. Every newspaper that will listen will hear about how the government steals children because of their blood rather than protecting them because of their humanity. The law once said I could be sold for $1. Doesn't make it right. Clara stepped forward. Here's what you're going to do, Mr. Whitfield. You're going to go back to your superiors and tell them that Eli Boone is thriving in a loving home with his adoptive mother, his governess aunt, and his foster father. You're going to mention that any attempt to remove him will result in a legal battle that will drag on for years and cost the government more than it's worth. And you're going to suggest that perhaps there are other children who actually need help, who could benefit from your attention instead. And if I don't, then I'll make sure every reservation school in the country is investigated. I have enough money to hire investigators, Mr. Whitfield. How many of those schools do you think can withstand scrutiny? How many children have died in them? How many have disappeared? Clara's voice dropped. I was in a workhouse for 3 years. I know what happens in places where unwanted people are hidden away. Do you really want me looking into your schools? Whitfield's face had gone pale. You're threatening the federal government. I'm promising to shine light in dark places. If that threatens you, perhaps you should ask yourself why. The standoff lasted another moment before Whitfield turned abruptly. We'll be in touch. As the federal agents rode away, Clara's legs gave out. She sank onto the porch steps, shaking. Jonah sat beside her, pulling her against him. You just declared war on the Bureau of Indian Affairs, he said. I know. They'll come back. I know. With more men. With legal documents. I know, Jonah. Clara turned to look at him. But what else could I do? Let them take him? Send him to one of those schools where they cut children's hair and beat them for speaking their own language? Nalia sat on Clara's other side, Eli still clinging to her. They kill them, she said quietly, not always with violence, sometimes just by killing their spirits, making them ashamed of who they are. That won't happen to Eli, Clara said firmly. I won't let it. That night, after Eli was asleep, the 3 adults sat around the kitchen table, planning. We need proof, Clara said. Something that makes Eli untouchable. What kind of proof? Jonah asked. I don't know. Something about his father, maybe? Whitfield knew about Thomas running bear. That means someone's been talking, investigating. My husband had friends in the army, Nalia said slowly. Men he served with. Some of them might help. Would they testify? Say something that could protect Eli? Maybe, if approached right. Nalia hesitated. There's something else. Something I haven't told you. Clara and Jonah waited. Thomas wasn't just a scout. He saved the life of a very important man, Colonel Morrison's son. Pulled him from a burning wagon during an Apache raid. The colonel wanted to give Thomas a medal, but they don't give medals to Indians, Jonah finished bitterly. The colonel wrote a letter instead. A private commendation, Thomas kept it, said it might be worth something someday. Nalia stood, moving to the trunk where she kept her few possessions. She pulled out an oilskin packet. I've been afraid to use it. Afraid it would draw attention. But now. Clara read the letter, her eyes widening. It was more than a commendation. It was a personal guarantee of protection for Thomas Running Bear and his family, signed by Colonel Morrison, who is now General Morrison, one of the highest-ranking officers in the Western Territories. This could work, Clara breathed. This could actually work. Or it could backfire, Jonah warned. The general might not want this brought up, might not want to be associated with protecting Indians. Only one way to find out. Clara stood, energized by purpose. I'll go to Fort Garland. Talk to the general personally. Not alone, you won't. You need to stay here. Protect Nalia and Eli in case Whitfield comes back. Then take someone else. Some of the ranch hands, maybe. They'd hired help over the winter. Former soldiers who'd served with Jonah. Men who didn't care about his reputation or the mixed nature of his household. Good men who needed work and weren't particular about who paid them. I'll take Marcus and Reed, Clara decided. Marcus was a former sergeant, Reed a scout. Both could handle themselves if trouble arose. The journey to Fort Garland took 2 days. Clara had sent a telegram ahead, requesting an audience with General Morrison on a matter of personal importance. She didn't mention Thomas Running Bear, not in a telegram that could be intercepted or gossiped about. The fort was intimidating, high walls, armed guards, the weight of federal authority in every stone. Clara had dressed carefully, playing the part of a lady of means rather than a mountain rancher. The same dress she'd worn to the bank in Denver, the same bearing of someone who expected to be listened to. General Morrison was older than she'd expected, with silver hair and tired eyes. He received her in his office, clearly puzzled by her visit. "Miss Boone, your telegram was rather mysterious. I apologize for that, General, but the matter is delicate." Clara pulled out Thomas's letter. "I believe you knew this man." The General's face changed as he read, a complexity of emotions Clara couldn't fully interpret. "Thomas Running Bear. Yes, I knew him. He's dead, I heard. Killed by soldiers who mistook his peaceful band for hostiles." Morrison's jaw tightened. "A tragedy. He was a good man. Better than most who wear this uniform, if I'm honest. He had a son." The General looked up sharply. "A son?" "Eli. 3 years old. I've adopted him, but the Bureau of Indian Affairs wants to take him. Send him to a reservation school." "That's the law." "The law is wrong." Clara leaned forward. "General, Thomas saved your son's life. His child is going to be stolen from a loving home and sent to a place where they'll try to beat the Indian out of him. Is that how we repay Thomas's sacrifice?" Morrison was quiet for a long moment, staring at the letter. "My son is a senator now, in Washington, because Thomas Running Bear pulled him from that burning wagon." He looked up at Clara. "What do you want from me?" "Protection. A letter stating that Eli is under your personal protection as the son of a man who served this country with honor. Something that will make the Bureau think twice." "That's a big ask, Miss Boone. It could damage my career taking such a stand." "Is your career worth more than a child's life?" The General stood, moving to the window that looked out over the parade grounds. "You know, Thomas talked about his son, about the world he hoped to leave him. A better world than this one, where a man's worth wasn't determined by his blood. Help me give Eli that world, or at least a chance at it." Morrison turned back to her. "You're not what I expected, Miss Boone. The report said you were a workhouse girl who inherited money." "I am." "No, you're something more than that." He moved to his desk, pulled out paper and ink. "I'll write your letter. More than that, I'll write to Washington. My son owes his life to Thomas Running Bear. Perhaps it's time he repaid that debt." Clara watched as the General wrote, his pen scratching across paper with the weight of authority. When he finished, he sealed it with his personal seal. "This won't make you popular," he warned as he handed it over. "I've never been popular, but I've recently discovered that being right is more important than being liked." "Thomas would have liked you," Morrison said softly. He appreciated people who stood up for what mattered. Clara left Fort Garland with more than just the General's letter. She had his promise of support, his son's political connections, and something else, a photograph Morrison had given her of Thomas in uniform, standing proud beside fellow soldiers. Eli should have this, the General had said, should know his father was a hero, even if history won't record it. The journey home felt lighter somehow, despite the weight of what lay ahead. But as they crested the ridge above the ranch, Clara's heart dropped. Smoke was rising from the direction of the cabin. "Ride!" she shouted to Marcus and Reed, spurring her horse forward. They thundered down the trail, fear driving them faster than safety allowed. But as they burst into the clearing, Clara saw the smoke was coming from the chimney, not from destruction. And in the yard, a crowd of people stood facing off. On one side, Whitfield and a dozen federal agents. On the other, Jonah with his rifle, Nalia holding Eli, and, Clara's breath caught, at least 30 others. Ranch hands, yes, but also former workhouse girls, some of the teachers from the school, even a few townspeople Clara recognized as parents of children attending classes. "What's happening?" Clara demanded, dismounting before her horse had fully stopped. "Miss Clara!" One of the workhouse girls, Susan, her name was, ran forward. "We heard they were coming for the little one. We couldn't let that happen. Not after everything you've done." Clara looked at the assembled crowd, people who had every reason to avoid trouble, standing here risking arrest or worse. "You all came," she said, wonder in her voice. "You saved us," Mrs. Patterson said simply. "Time we returned the favor." Whitfield pushed forward. "This is obstruction of justice. I'll have you all arrested." "On what grounds?" Clara pulled out Morrison's letter. "I have here a personal guarantee of protection for Eli Running Bear, son of Thomas Running Bear, from General Morrison himself. Furthermore, Senator Morrison of Washington has been informed of this situation and is very interested in how the Bureau treats the children of war heroes." "War heroes? Who?" Whitfield sputtered. "He was just an Indian scout. He was a man who saved American lives at the cost of his own. That makes him a hero in my book." Clara handed him the letter. "Read it. Then decide if you really want to pursue this." As Whitfield read, his face grew paler. The seal was genuine, the implications clear. Fighting Clara Boone was one thing. Fighting a general and a senator was quite another. This changes things," he admitted reluctantly. "Yes, it does." Clara moved to stand with her family, her community, her chosen people. "Eli stays here. And if you or anyone else tries to take him, you'll face not just us, but the full weight of military honor and political influence." "And the newspapers, well," added a new voice. Clara turned to see Frederick Hammond, the Denver journalist she'd cultivated. "Miss Boone invited me to document this situation. Government attempts to steal war hero's orphan will make quite a headline, don't you think?" Whitfield looked around, at the armed mountain man, the determined heiress, the protective community, the journalist scribbling notes. "This isn't over," he said, but the fight had gone out of his voice. "Yes, it is," Clara said firmly. "You're going to leave. Report to your superiors that Eli Boone is exactly where he should be and never come back. Because if you do, I'll make it my life's mission to expose every cruel thing done in those reservation schools. Every child who's died. Every family destroyed. I have the money, the connections, and now the motivation. Do you really want to give me a reason to use them?" Whitfield retreated, his agents following. As their horses disappeared down the trail, a cheer went up from the assembled crowd. People hugged, cried, celebrated. Eli, not understanding the specifics but sensing the joy, laughed and clapped his hands. That evening, they held a feast. Tables set up in the yard, everyone contributing what they could. Former workhouse girls sat beside ranch hands, teachers beside townspeople, all united in their defense of a child's right to be loved. As the sun set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and pink, Clara stood with Jonah and Nalia, watching Eli play with the other children who'd come with their parents. "We did it," Nalia said softly. "For now," Jonah said, ever practical, "there'll be other challenges." "Then we'll face them," Clara said. "Together." Sheriff Hawley approached, hat in hand. Clara tensed, but his expression was different than she'd ever seen it. "Miss Boone, I owe you an apology." "For which part? Letting me be sold, threatening my family, or all of it?" He looked genuinely remorseful. "I've been sheriff here for 10 years, and I've done things, followed laws that weren't right. Seeing you today, seeing all these people stand up for what's right instead of what's legal, it's made me think. Thinking's good, Sheriff. Acting is better. Then let me act now. If anyone else comes for the boy, they'll have to go through me, too. That's a promise." Clara studied him, then nodded. "I'll hold you to that." As the sheriff walked away, Clara felt something shift in the air. Change was coming to Ironwood, slow maybe, but real. "Mama Clara!" Eli's voice called out. He ran to her, arms outstretched. She caught him, swinging him up onto her hip. "Yes, my love?" "Story? Please." What kind of story? About Papa Bear. He'd taken to calling Thomas that from the stories Nalia told. Clara looked at Nalia, who nodded. Yes, let's tell stories about Papa Bear, about how brave he was, how good. They gathered the children around, and as stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they told stories. True stories about Thomas Running Bear, embellished stories about bravery and love, important stories about how people could choose to be family regardless of blood. Later, after the guests had gone home and Eli was asleep, Clara stood in her garden, the one she'd coaxed from the mountain soil. It was thriving now, like everything else she'd touched with desperate love and fierce protection. You know they'll try again, Jonah said, joining her. Different agencies, different excuses? I know. And we'll fight them, Nalia added, appearing on Clara's other side, every time. Together, Clara said. They stood there, unlikely family, looking out at the land they'd claimed, the home they'd built, the life they'd carved from impossibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. It always did. There would be those who hated them for what they represented, those who feared the change they embodied. But tonight, Eli was safe. The community had stood with them. The law, for once, was on their side. Tell me, Jonah said suddenly. That first day, when you signed those papers for $1, did you imagine this? Clara laughed, soft and warm. I imagined surviving another day, maybe another week. I never imagined this, being loved, having family, mattering to people. You always mattered, Nalia said firmly. The world just took its time noticing. A coyote howled in the distance, and its pack answered. The sound should have been threatening, but instead it felt like recognition. Wild things calling to wild things, survivors acknowledging each other across the darkness. I need to tell you both something, Clara said. I'm pregnant. The silence that followed was complete, even the night sounds seeming to pause. What? Jonah's voice was strangled. About 2 months along, I think. I wasn't sure, but now. She placed a hand on her still flat stomach. Now I am. Jonah spun her around, his face a mix of joy and terror. Clara, are you... Is this... Yes, I'm happy. Yes, I want this. Yes, I know it complicates everything. She touched his face. But when has that ever stopped us? Nalia embraced them both, tears on her cheeks. Another child for our strange family. Eli will be a big brother, Clara said, wonder in her voice. We'll have to make sure he knows how important that is. He'll be perfect, Jonah said roughly, emotion thick in his voice. Just like his mother. Mothers, Clara corrected. This child will have 2 mothers, just like Eli. If Nalia agrees. Always, Nalia said immediately. Always and forever. They went inside together, to their home that smelled of bread and wood smoke, that echoed with a child's laughter and a family's love. Clara paused at the doorway, looking back at the star-filled sky. Her mother had been right. Education was the one thing they couldn't take from you. But she'd been wrong, too. They couldn't take love either, or courage, or the fierce determination to protect what mattered. They couldn't take the family you chose or the community you built. And they certainly couldn't take the life growing inside her, conceived in love and hope, who would be born into a world where a workhouse girl could become a mother, a teacher, a protector, where $1 could buy a chance at redemption, where love was stronger than law. Coming, Jonah called from inside. Always, Clara said, and closed the door on the darkness, choosing instead the warmth and light of home. The news of Clara's pregnancy spread through the community quickly, as news always did in small places. The reactions were mixed, joy from those who loved them, scandal from those who still disapproved of their unconventional arrangement. But Clara found she cared less and less about others' opinions. Summer arrived in full glory, painting the meadows with wildflowers. Clara's belly grew rounder, and Eli took to patting it gently, talking to Baby, in a mix of English and Lakota that made everyone smile. One afternoon, as Clara sat in the shade teaching a group of children from the school, a familiar figure appeared on the trail. Mrs. Clearwater, of all people, riding alone. The children scattered, sensing tension. Clara stood carefully. Movement was becoming more difficult as her pregnancy advanced. Mrs. Clearwater, to what do I owe this unexpected pleasure? The older woman dismounted, and Clara was shocked to see tears on her face. My grandson is dying. Whatever Clara had expected, it wasn't this. I'm sorry, I don't. My daughter's boy, in Denver. The doctors say it's consumption. They say there's nothing to be done. Mrs. Clearwater's composure cracked entirely. He's only 4 years old. What do you want from me? Nalia. The name came out desperate. I've heard she knows healing. Native medicine. Things white doctors don't understand. Clara's first instinct was to refuse. This woman had made their lives miserable, had tried to have Eli taken away. But then she looked at Mrs. Clearwater's face and saw not the society matron, but a grandmother in pain. I'll ask her, Clara said quietly, but I make no promises. To everyone's surprise, Nalia agreed immediately. A child's life is worth more than old grudges, she said simply. They traveled to Denver together, Clara, Nalia, and Mrs. Clearwater. The journey was awkward at first, years of animosity creating walls between them. But somewhere along the way, Mrs. Clearwater began to talk. I was poor once, she said quietly, before I married Mr. Clearwater. My family worked in the mills back east. I know what it's like to be hungry, to be looked down on. Then why? Clara asked. Why treat others the same way? Because I was terrified of sliding back. Of being that girl again. It was easier to step on others than risk being stepped on. She looked at Clara directly. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just understanding. Nalia worked with the sick boy for 3 days, using herbs and techniques passed down through generations. Whether it was the medicine, the prayers, or simple coincidence, the child's fever broke. He would live. Mrs. Clearwater wept openly when the doctors confirmed her grandson's recovery. How can I repay you? Change, Clara said simply. Use your influence for good instead of judgment. That's payment enough. When they returned to Ironwood, something had shifted. Mrs. Clearwater became, if not an ally, at least not an enemy. She quietly supported the school, donated to the fund Clara had started for abandoned children, and most importantly, stopped the whisper campaigns against them. The first snow of autumn came early that year, dusting the mountains while Clara's labor pains began. She'd been expecting them for days, her body heavy with the weight of new life. But when they finally arrived, they came with a vengeance that took her breath away. It's too soon, she gasped, gripping Nalia's hand as another contraction rolled through her. The midwife won't make it from town in this weather. Then we do this ourselves, Nalia said calmly, though Clara could see concern in her eyes. I've delivered many babies, including Eli. Trust me. Jonah paced the main room like a caged mountain cat, his usual composure shattered. Every cry from Clara sent him toward the bedroom door, only to be turned back by Mrs. Patterson, who'd arrived that morning with supplies for the school and found herself recruited as an assistant midwife. Men and birthing don't mix, she said firmly, pushing him back. You'll only make things worse. That's my wife in there. Not legally, Sheriff Hawley said from his chair by the fire. He'd come to discuss some rustling problems and found himself trapped by the storm in Clara's labor. Though I suppose that could be remedied. Jonah turned on him. What? I said I could marry you, legally. I have the authority, and given the circumstances. He gestured toward the bedroom where Clara's cries were growing stronger. Might be good for the child to be born legitimate. You'd do that? After everything? The sheriff stood, adjusting his vest. Miss Boone, Mrs. Cutter, whatever she is, she changed things in this town. Made us look at ourselves. I didn't like what I saw. He pulled out a worn book from his jacket. Got the words right here, assuming she says yes between contractions. What followed was perhaps the strangest wedding ceremony in Colorado history. Clara, propped up in bed between labor pains, sweat-soaked and exhausted, exchanging vows with Jonah while Nalia held her hand and Mrs. Patterson timed contractions. Do you, Clara Boone, take this man? Sheriff Hawley began. Yes, yes, God, yes, just hurry. Clara broke off, groaning through another wave of pain. And do you, Jonah Cutter? I do. Everything. Whatever she wants. Just help her. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I pronounce you. Clara's scream cut off the rest as the baby finally decided to make its appearance. What followed was a blur of activity, Nalia's calm voice guiding Clara through the final pushes. Jonah finally allowed in to hold his wife's hand, his face white with terror and awe. Then, as the storm cleared and the first rays of dawn broke through the clouds, a new cry filled the cabin. Not Clara's pain, but a baby's first protest against the cold world. "It's a girl," Nalia announced, placing the squalling infant on Clara's chest. Perfect and healthy, and with her mother's fighting spirit. Clara looked down at her daughter through tears, seeing Jonah's dark hair and what might be her own stubborn chin. "Hello, little one. Welcome to our strange, wonderful family. What will you name her?" Mrs. Patterson asked, wiping her own eyes. Clara looked at Jonah, then at Nalia, then at little Eli, who'd been allowed in to meet his sister. "Grace," she said softly. "Grace Margaret Cutter. For the grace that brought us all together, and for my mother who would have loved her so much." "Grace," Eli repeated solemnly, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny fist. "My sister Grace." The news of Grace's birth spread through the valley like wildfire. The baby born in a blizzard, delivered by a native healer, her parents married by the sheriff who'd once tried to separate them. It was the kind of story that would be told for generations, growing more elaborate with each telling. But for Clara, the days that followed were simple and precious. Learning to nurse her daughter while Eli helped by singing Lakota lullabies Nalia had taught him. Watching Jonah hold Grace with hands that could break a man's neck, but cradled her like spun glass. Seeing Nalia naturally step into her role as second mother, as essential to the children as breath. 2 weeks after Grace's birth, an unexpected visitor arrived. A well-dressed black woman in her 50s, carrying herself with the dignity of someone who'd fought for every inch of respect she commanded. "I'm looking for Clara Boone. Sorry, Clara Cutter," she said when Jonah answered the door. "I'm Clara," she said, emerging with Grace in her arms. "How can I help you?" "My name is Josephine Washington. I run a school for colored children in Denver. I heard about what you did here, buying the workhouse, starting a school for poor children. I came to see if it was true." "It's true. Though I don't run the school myself anymore. Mrs. Patterson and the others handle that. But you fund it. And you accept all children, regardless of race. Education shouldn't depend on the color of your skin or the weight of your purse," Clara said simply. Josephine studied her for a long moment. "I have a proposition for you, Mrs. Cutter. There are children in Denver, colored, Chinese, Mexican, who can't attend the white schools. Their families work hard but can't afford private tutoring. They need education as much as any child. What are you asking? Help me expand my school. Your money, your influence, your particular way of making things happen." Josephine smiled slightly. "I've heard about how you handle opposition." Clara looked at Jonah, who nodded slightly, then at Nalia, who was listening intently. "I have a condition," Clara said. "Name it." "Native children, too." "Full inclusion. And Nalia helps develop curriculum that honors all traditions, not just European ones." Josephine extended her hand. "Deal." What started as 1 school became 3, then 5. The Clara Cutter Educational Foundation, as the lawyers insisted on calling it, began funding schools throughout Colorado. Not just buildings and books, but hot meals for students, clothes for those who needed them, and most importantly, teachers who saw their students as human beings worthy of respect. But with visibility came danger. Not everyone appreciated Clara's mission to educate the wrong sorts of children. The attack came on a clear November night. Clara woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of breaking glass. Fire bottles thrown through the windows of the main room. "Get the children!" she screamed to Nalia while Jonah grabbed his rifle and rushed outside. Clara ran for the water buckets, her nightgown catching on furniture in the smoke-filled darkness. The curtains were ablaze, fire spreading to the walls. She could hear men shouting outside, Jonah's rifle firing, horses screaming. Nalia appeared with both children, Eli clinging to her skirts while she carried Grace. "The back door!" "No!" Clara grabbed a bucket, throwing water on the flames nearest to them. "They might be waiting. The root cellar!" They rushed to the kitchen, pulling up the heavy door that led to the underground storage area. It was cramped and dark, but safe from fire and bullets. "Stay here," Clara ordered, "no matter what you hear." "Clara, no," Nalia started. "Protect them. That's your job. This is mine." Clara grabbed the shotgun from beside the kitchen door and stepped out into chaos. The barn was fully ablaze, horses running free in panic. She could see figures in the firelight, masked men, at least 6 of them. Jonah was pinned behind the well, trading shots with 3 of them. Clara didn't think, just acted. She fired the shotgun at the nearest attacker, the buckshot catching him in the shoulder and spinning him to the ground. The others turned toward her, and she dove behind the chicken coop as bullets splintered the wood around her. "You should have minded your own business, woman," someone shouted. She recognized the voice, Tom Bradley, the banker's son. "You mean I should have stayed worthless and grateful?" Clara shouted back, reloading. "Sorry to disappoint." She heard hoofbeats. Reinforcements? But then familiar voices rang out. Marcus and Reed, the ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse, had grabbed rifles and joined the fight. Then more horses. Sheriff Hawley and 2 deputies, drawn by the smoke and gunfire. "This is the law!" Hawley shouted. "Drop your weapons, or we'll drop you!" The attackers tried to flee, but they were outnumbered now. Within minutes, it was over. 3 men captured, including Tom Bradley. 2 escaped into the darkness. 1 lay groaning in the dirt from Clara's shotgun blast. As the sun rose, revealing the full extent of the damage, Clara stood looking at the smoldering remains of the barn. They'd lost the structure but saved the animals. The cabin was damaged but standing. Most importantly, everyone was alive. "They were going to burn us out," she said quietly to Jonah. "Kill us all because we dared to educate the wrong children. They failed. This time." Sheriff Hawley approached, Tom Bradley in chains beside him. The young man's mask had been removed, his face defiant despite his capture. "He's confessed," Hawley said. "Named his accomplices too. They'll all stand trial. A trial where white men are judged for attacking a family that harbors Indians and educates coloreds?" Clara laughed bitterly. "How do you think that'll go?" "Better than you might think," Hawley said. "Mrs. Clearwater's already talking to the judge. And that journalist from Denver, Hammond? He's been photographing everything. This is going to be big news. Terrorists attack school founder's family. That kind of press makes it hard to let them walk." Tom Bradley spit at Clara's feet. "You're destroying everything this town stands for." "Good," Clara said simply. "It was built on wrong foundations anyway. Time to start over." The trial made national news. Frederick Hammond's articles, complete with photographs of the burned barn and testimony from the children who attended Clara's schools, appeared in newspapers from Denver to New York. Letters of support poured in, along with donations for rebuilding. Tom Bradley and 2 others were convicted and sentenced to 5 years in prison. It was lighter than Clara had hoped, but more than anyone had expected. The judge, in his statement, said something that would be quoted for years. "When we allow fear and hatred to drive us to violence against families and children, we cease to be civilized men and become mere beasts. The law must stand against such devolution." The barn was rebuilt within a month, neighbors and strangers alike showing up to help. Some came out of genuine support, others out of guilt, and a few just curious to see the woman who'd stood off 6 armed men in her nightgown. During the rebuilding, something remarkable happened. A delegation from the Lakota, Nalia's people, arrived with gifts, blankets, food, and most surprisingly, an offer. "You protected one of our children when the law would have stolen him," the elder said through Nalia's translation. "You gave his mother sanctuary and dignity. We wish to honor this." They performed a ceremony adopting Clara and Jonah into the tribe. Clara wept as they gave her a Lakota name that translated to "woman who stands before storms." Jonah received the name Mountain That Shelters. "Now you are truly family," the elder told them. "Your children are our children. Your fight is our fight." As winter deepened, the ranch became something more than just a home. It became a symbol, a gathering place for those who believed in the new world Clara was trying to build. Teachers came to learn Nalia's integrated curriculum. Activists came to plan new schools. Families came seeking sanctuary and finding community. One snowy evening in December, Clara stood in the main room of the rebuilt cabin, looking at the scene before her. Jonah sat by the fire, Grace sleeping in his arms while he told Eli a story. Nalia was teaching a group of young women, former workhouse girls, how to read and write. Mrs. Patterson was arguing cheerfully with Marcus about the best way to preserve vegetables. Sheriff Hawley, who'd become a regular visitor, was playing checkers with Reed. "You did this," Josephine Washington said, coming to stand beside her. She'd arrived that morning with news of another school opening. "All of this exists because you refused to accept your place." "I was sold for $1, Clara said softly. "Everyone thought that was my worth." And now, Clara thought of the schools bearing her name, the children learning to read. The families kept together because of her intervention. She thought of the laws slowly changing, the minds gradually opening, the world incrementally becoming better. "Now I know worth can't be measured in money, only in the lives you touch and the changes you make." "Mama!" Eli called out, running to her with a book. "Story!" Clara lifted him onto her hip, this boy who wasn't hers by blood, but was hers in every way that mattered. "What story would you like?" "The dollar story." "Again?" Clara laughed. "You know it by heart." "Tell it anyway, with all the parts." So Clara sat in her rocking chair, Eli on her lap, and began the story he loved best. How a mountain man paid $1 for a woman nobody wanted. How that woman turned out to be worth more than anyone imagined. How they built a family from fragments, a home from hope, a future from faith. As she spoke, others gathered to listen. The story had become legend already, but hearing it from Clara herself gave it weight and warmth. "And then what happened?" Eli asked, though he knew the answer. "And then," Clara said, looking around the room at all these people who'd become her family, "we all lived. Not happily ever after, because that's for fairy tales. But we lived with purpose and love, and the knowledge that we'd made something beautiful from something broken." "Tell the new part," Eli demanded, "about what comes next." Clara smiled. This was a recent addition to their ritual, looking forward instead of back. "What comes next is up to us," she said. "Maybe more schools. Maybe new laws that protect all children. Maybe a world where no one gets sold for any price because everyone knows that human worth can't be measured in dollars." "That's a big maybe," Sheriff Hawley said from his corner. "All the best things start as big maybes," Clara replied. "Like a mountain man at an auction seeing something others missed. Like a woman finding strength she didn't know she had. Like a community choosing love over law." Grace stirred in Jonah's arms, making the soft sounds that meant she'd be hungry soon. Clara passed Eli to Nalia and took her daughter, settling her to nurse. The room fell into comfortable quiet, the only sounds the crackling fire and the wind singing through the mountains. "I have news," Jonah said suddenly. "A letter came today. From Washington." Everyone turned to look at him. "Senator Morrison. He's introducing legislation to protect Native children from forced removal to reservation schools. He's calling it the Running Bear Act, after Thomas." Nalia gasped, her hand going to her mouth. "He's naming it for my husband?" "Says here that Thomas Running Bear represents the best of what America could be. Brave men of all backgrounds standing together for what's right. The act would require proof of neglect or abuse before Native children could be removed from their families." "It'll never pass," Sheriff Hawley said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe not this year," Clara said. "Or next. But someday. Change is slow, but it's coming." "You sound very sure," Josephine observed. "I am." Clara looked down at Grace, then at Eli, then at all the faces around her. "Because we're raising the generation that will make it happen. These children who are learning together, playing together, seeing each other as human beings first, they're going to change everything." A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Everyone tensed. Unexpected visitors at night were rarely good news. Jonah rose, rifle in hand, and opened the door cautiously. A young woman stood there, thin and shivering, a bundle in her arms. Clara recognized the look in her eyes, the same desperation she'd once carried. "Please," the woman said. I heard you help people. My baby. They want to take my baby because I'm not married and I can't pay my debts and—" "Come in," Clara said immediately, rising despite Grace's protests at interrupted feeding. Come in from the cold. You're safe here. As they settled the woman, Sarah her name was, by the fire with hot soup and blankets, Clara caught Jonah's eye. He smiled, that rare full smile that transformed his face. Another stray? He murmured. Another person who needs what we needed, Clara corrected. A chance. Later that night, after Sarah and her baby were settled in the spare room, after the guests had gone home and the children were asleep, Clara and Jonah stood on the porch, despite the cold, looking out at their land under starlight. No regrets? He asked, as he did sometimes. Never, she answered, as she always did. Even though you could have been a lady of leisure in Denver? Clara laughed, the sound carrying across the snow-covered meadow. Can you imagine? Me in a fancy house, hosting tea parties, pretending the world was fine as it was? No, Jonah admitted. I can't imagine you as anything other than what you are. And what's that? He pulled her close, his arms strong and sure around her. A force of nature, a storm that cleanses, a mountain that shelters. He used her Lakota name, pronouncing it carefully. The woman who was worth infinitely more than the dollar I paid. You know what I realized? Clara said, leaning into his warmth. That dollar wasn't the price of my worth. It was the price of my freedom, cheap at twice the cost. Above them, the northern lights began to dance, rare this far south, but not impossible. Like so many things Clara had learned, rare didn't mean impossible. It just meant you had to wait for the right conditions, the right moment, the right alignment of circumstances. Make a wish, Jonah said, following the old superstition about the lights. Clara closed her eyes, but she didn't wish. She thanked for the dollar that had brought her here, for the man who'd seen her worth, for the family they'd built, for the community they'd gathered, for the changes they'd sparked, for the grace that had transformed a humiliation into a liberation. When she opened her eyes, the lights were still dancing, and from inside the cabin she could hear Grace beginning to fuss, and Eli calling out in his sleep. The sounds of family, of home, of a life she'd never dared dream of when she stood on that platform. We should go in, she said. In a moment. Jonah turned her to face him. I want to tell you something. That day at the auction, I didn't have $1. Clara stared at him. What? I had nothing. I'd come to town to trade pelts, but hadn't done it yet. That dollar I threw? It was my last coin, everything I had in the world. But you acted so confident, so sure. I was sure. The moment I saw you, I knew. You were worth everything I had, even if everything was just $1. Clara felt tears on her cheeks, freezing in the cold air. You risked everything on me? No, Jonah said simply. I invested everything in us. Best dollar I ever spent. From inside, Grace's cries grew louder, and Nalia's voice joined the chorus, singing a soothing lullaby, the sounds of their unconventional, impossible, perfect family. Come on, Clara said, taking Jonah's hand. Our daughter's hungry, and tomorrow we have 3 more families coming to discuss school placement for their children. The work never ends, Jonah observed. Good work never should. As they turned to go inside, Clara paused one last time to look at the sign Jonah had carved above their door. Mercy Ridge, all welcome here. It had started as just a name, a hope, a promise to herself that this place would be different. Now it was a reality, a beacon, a testament to the truth that worth couldn't be bought or sold, only recognized and honored. You coming? Jonah asked from the doorway, silhouetted by the warm light from within. Always, Clara said, and stepped through the door into the warmth, the light, the love that a single dollar had made possible. Behind her, the northern lights continued their dance, blessing the mountains with their rare beauty. And somewhere in the valley below, another desperate soul saw the lights in the windows of Mercy Ridge and began the long climb toward hope. The dollar auction was over. The real work, the work of building a world where no one would ever be sold again, had just begun. And Clara Boone Cutter, the woman nobody wanted, the woman worth only $1, the woman who'd turned humiliation into triumph, was ready for all of it.